Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone, where we are celebrating finally having made it uh, over the hill to get to Twitch affiliate ships, and now we have the ability to congratulate subscribers, and people can spend their channel points that they get for watching, and I get a bunch of other stuff on the back end of the website. But the biggest thing is the channel points. The channel points are why I was pushing so hard for affiliate. And we finally made it. We finally made it here. Everything's great. It took a while, but we did it. We did it, everybody. Uh, what else has the podcast listener missed since last time? Last time we finished off Crystal Age, and actually the raid that was in Crystal Age, which I might actually keep in for once. That was the thing that pushed us over the line for affiliate. Many thanks to Ragged World for that 11-person raid that came in, swooped in, and got us over the line, and we're now a Twitch affiliate. I got all sorts of bells and whistles at my fingertips, and we got all sorts of surprises that'll be happening on the live stream. But the biggest thing that you, the podcast listener, will be able to hear is that we are finally coming back to Astounding Stories of Super Science. I said way back in season 1, a couple episodes in, oh, we'll come back to these sometime. I've been waiting. I've been waiting, and we're finally going to jump back into Astounding Stories with the July issue, uh, which I have been so excited to jump back into these. Um, with such wonderful short stories as Beyond the Heaviside Layer by Captain S.P. Meek, Earth the Marauder by Arthur J. Burks, From an Amber Block by Tom Curry, The Terror of Aircraft Level 6 by Harl Vincent, The Forgotten Planet by Sewell Peaslee Wright, The Power and the Glory by Charles W. Diffin, Murder Madness by Murray Leinster, and last but not least, The Reader's Corner, which I will be reading for once. Oh no, Murder Madness is a multi-parter. Well, you're gonna have to jump all the way back to season 1 for that one, folks. I do not remember where we left off, so we'll see how it stands on its own. Because I'm not gonna lie to you, it's been several years since I've read that, so it's not in my brain anymore. Uh, for those curious, this at the time this was published in 1930, a single copy was 20 cents, and a yearly subscription to Astounding Stories was $2. Let's check the inflation on that, shall we? I had it pulled up, but I accidentally closed it while I was rushing to open stream. We take those. So 1930. In 1930, let's do the yearly subscription, $2. If we purchased it this year, it would be $35 in comparison to a modern yearly subscription. A modern yearly subscription to analog, which is what it's known as now, is $118. So yeah, from $35 to $118. Sure, they put a lot more work into it now. They do the digital distribution, they do the whole, they also still have print options in this day and age. They pay their writers a lot better, they pay their artists a lot better, but from $35 to $115, how far have we come into the future to make it cost that much? Isn't that wild? I I've been looking forward to coming back to these so much. I've been on, I was on a short story kick there for a while. And part of why I was on such a short story kick was specifically of uh because of these these, where we started with, analog. It was very much, or analog. It's analog now. It was Astounding Stories at the time. You know, I started with these because I was like, oh, it's really appealing. Like Gariki says, it's really appealing to have short stories. You can just jump in at any time. And I was really on a short stories kick for a while there because I was missing just grabbing a collection of short stories off the shelf and saying, go. And I've been looking forward to coming back to these. We'll see how good any of them are. I think I've dillied. I think I've dallied quite enough. Let's get started on our lovely, lovely affiliate celebration stream with Beyond the Heaviside Layer by Captain S.P. Meek. McQuarrie, the city editor, looked up as I entered his office. Bond, you know Jim Carpenter? Well, I know him slightly, I replied cautiously. I've met him several times, and I interviewed him some years ago when he improved the Hadley rocket motor. I can't claim a very extensive acquaintance with him. I thought you knew him well. It's a surprise to me that you can find there's any prominent man who's not an especial friend of yours. At any rate, you know him as well as any of the staff, so I'll give you the assignment. What's he up to now? He's gonna try and punch a hole in the Heaviside layer. But that's impossible. How can anyone... My voice died away in silence. True enough, the idea of trying to make a permanent hole in a field of magnetic force was absurd, but even as I spoke, I remembered that Jim Carpenter had never agreed to the opinion almost unanimously held by our scientists as to the true nature of the Heaviside layer. Well, it may be impossible, but you're not hired by this paper as a scientific consultant. For some reason, God only knows why, the owner thinks you're a reporter. Get down there, try to prove he's right by digging up a few facts about Carpenter's attempt. Wire your stuff in, Peavy will write it up. On this one occasion, please try to conceal your erudition and send your story in simple words, one syllable, uneducated men like Peavy and I can comprehend. That's all. He turned again to his desk, and I left the room. At one time, I would have come from such an interview with my face burning, but McQuarrie's vitriol slid off me like water off a duck's back. He didn't really mean half of what he said, and he knew just as well as I did that his crack about holding my job with the Clarion as a matter of pull was grossly unjust. It's true that I knew Trimble, the owner of the Clarion, fairly well, but I got my job without any aid from him. McQuarrie himself hired me, and I held my job because he hasn't fired me, despite the caustic remarks which he addressed to me. I had made the mistake when I first got on the paper, of letting McQuarrie know that I was a graduate electrical engineer from Leland University, and he held it against me from that day on. I don't know whether he really held it seriously against me or not, but what I've written above is a fair sample of his usual manner toward me. In point of fact, I had greatly minimized the extent of my acquaintance with Jim Carpenter. I had been in Leland at the same time that he was, and had known him quite well. When I graduated, which was 2 years after he did, I worked for about a year in his laboratory, and my knowledge of the improvement which had made the Hadley rocket motor a practicability came from first-hand knowledge and not from an interview. That was several years before, but I knew he never forgot an acquaintance, let alone a friend, and while I had left him to take up other work, our parting had been pleasant, and I looked forward with real pleasure to seeing him again. Immediately, this calls to mind that recent H.G. Wells story we did about journeying to the moon in an antigrav box. I'm like, oh man, a weird scientific invention that seems to run in a way that's startling, and also happens to be doing something that runs counter to the intended scientific mindset of the time. How strange. So much so that I literally had to just check that I was not reading the wrong issue. We are on July. We ended off in June. Like I was sitting here like, oh no, did I start the wrong one? No, we started the right one. I had to make sure that it wasn't me rereading what was the book called? The H.G. Wells Moon one, the one with the anti-grav metal. You know what I mean? If you've been around, you know what I mean. Hi, Magnus. You want to come up and join it? You want to come up and join us? You want to say hi? The big stream tonight. You want to come say hi? Oh, well, that scared him off. He's like, no, I don't want to be on camera. Not when it's important. I'm gonna have cause problems. Well, choose good problems, kitty. Oh. Anyway, where were we? Jim Carpenter, the stormy petrel of modern science. The eternal iconoclast, the perpetual opponent. He was probably as deeply versed in the theory of electricity and physical chemistry as any man alive, but it pleased him to pose as a practical man who knew next to nothing of theory and who despised the little he did know. His great delight was to experimentally smash the most beautifully constructed theories which were advanced and taught in the colleges and universities of the world, and when he couldn't smash them by experimental evidence, to attack them from the standpoint of philosophical reasoning and to twist around the data on which they were built and make it prove, or seem to prove, the exact opposite of what was generally accepted. No one questioned his ability. When the ill-fated Hadley had first constructed the rocket motor which bears his name, it was Jim Carpenter who made it practical. Hadley had tried to disintegrate lead in order to get its back thrust from the atomic energy which it contained, and proved, by apparently unimpeachable mathematics, that lead was the only substance which could be used. Jim Carpenter had snorted through the pages of the electrical journals, and found out that a modification of Hadley's invention disintegrated aluminum. The main difference in performance was that while Hadley's original motor couldn't develop enough power to lift itself from the ground, Carpenter's modification produced 20 times the horsepower per pound of weight of any previously known generator of power, and changed the rocket ship from a wild dream to an everyday commonplace. My immediate first thought is this when aluminum is rare, or is this after they've figured out the aluminum process? Cheap aluminum when in history. We've definitely searched this fact on the podcast before. The price of aluminum began to drop from $12 a pound to $4.76. Yeah, by the 1930s, aluminum was as cheap as we expect it to be reasonably. Aluminum, in the time this was published, was only 20 cents a pound. So, yeah, that tracks. I wanted to make sure it wasn't like, oh, aluminum, super rare. Oh, no. No. When Hadley later constructed his space flyer and proposed to visit the moon, it was Jim Carpenter who ridiculed the idea of the attempt being successful. He proposed the novel and weird idea that the path to space was not open, but that the Earth and the atmosphere were enclosed in a hollow sphere of impenetrable substance through which Hadley's space flyer could not pass. How accurate were his prognostications was soon known to everyone. Hadley built and equipped his flyer and started off on what he hoped would be an epoch-making flight. It was one, but not in the way which he had hoped. His ship took off readily enough, being powered with 4 rocket motors working on Carpenter's principle, and rose to a height of about 50 miles, gaining velocity rapidly. At that point, his velocity suddenly began to drop. He was in constant radio communication with the Earth and reported his difficulty. Carpenter advised him to turn back while he could, but Hadley kept on. Slower and slower became his progress, and after he had penetrated 10 miles into the substance which hindered him, his ship stuck fast. Instead of using his bow motors and trying to back out, he had moved them to the rear, and with the combined force of his 4 motors, he had penetrated for another 2 miles. There he insanely tried to force his motors to drive him on until his fuel was exhausted. He had lived for over a year in his space flyer, but all of his efforts did not serve to materially change his position. He had tried, of course, to go out through his airlocks and explore space, but his strength, even though aided by powerful levers, could not open the outer doors, the locks, against the force which was holding them shut. Careful observations were continuously made at the position of his flyer, and it was found that it was gradually returning toward the earth. Its motion was very slight, not enough to give any hope for the occupant, but Starting from a motion so slow that it could hardly be detected, the velocity of return gradually accelerated, and 3 years after Hadley's death, the flyer was suddenly released from the force which held it, and it plunged to the earth, to be reduced by the force of its fall to a twisted, pitiful mass of unrecognizable junk. The remains were examined, and the iron-steel parts were found to be highly magnetized. This fact was seized upon by the scientists of the world, and a theory was built up of a magnetic field of force surrounding the Earth, through which nothing of magnetic nature should pass. This theory received almost universal acceptance, Jim Carpenter alone of the prominent men of learning refusing to admit the validity of it. He gravely stated it as his belief that no magnetic field existed, but that the Heaviside layer was composed of some liquid of high viscosity, whose density and consequent resistance to the passage of a body through it increased in the ratio of the square of the distance to which one penetrated into it. There was a moment of stunned surprise when he announced his radical idea, then a burst of Jovian laughter shook the scientific press. Carpenter was in his glory. For months he waged a bitter controversy in the scientific journals, and when he failed to win converts by this method, he announced that he would prove it by blasting away into space through the Heaviside layer, a thing of which would be patently impossible were the field of force. He had lapsed into silence for 2 years, and his curt note to the Associated Press to the effect that he was now ready to demonstrate his experiment was the first intimation the world had ever received of his progress. I drew some expense money from the cashier and boarded the Lark for Los Angeles. When I arrived, I went to a hotel and at once called Carpenter on the telephone. Jim Carpenter speaking. Good evening, Mr. Carpenter. This is Bond of the San Francisco Clarion. I would be ashamed to repeat the language which came over that telephone. I was informed that all reporters were pests, and I was a doubly obnoxious specimen, that were I within reach I'd be promptly assaulted, that reporters would be received at 9 the next morning, and no earlier nor later. Just a minute, Mr. Carpenter, I cried as he neared the end of his peroration, and was, I fancied, about to slam up the receiver. Don't you remember me? I was at Leland with you. Used to work in your laboratory in the atomic disintegration section. What's your name? Bond, Mr. Carpenter. Oh, First Mortgage. Certainly I remember you. Mighty glad to hear your voice. How are you? Fine, thank you, Mr. Carpenter. I wouldn't have ventured to call you had I not known you. I didn't mean to impose, and I'll be glad to see you in the morning at 9. Not by a long shot. You'll come up right away. Where are you staying? At the El Rey. Well, check out and come right up here. There's lots of room for you here at the plant, and I'll be glad to have you. Want at least one intelligent report of this experiment. You should be able to write it. I'll look for you in an hour. I don't want to impose. Nonsense. Glad to have you. I needed someone like you badly. You've come in just the nick of time. I'll expect you in an hour. The receiver clicked, and I hastened to follow his instructions. A ringside seat was just what I was looking for. It took my taxi a little over an hour to get to the Carpenter laboratory, and I chuckled when I thought of how McQuarrie's face would look when he saw my expense account. Presently, we reached the edge of the grounds which surrounded the Carpenter laboratory, and were stopped at the high gate I remembered so well. Are you sure you'll get in, buddy? Certainly. What made you ask? Well, I bought 3 trips out here today. None of them got in. I'm glad you're so sure, but I'll wait around until you're inside before I drive away. I laughed and advanced to the gate. Tim, the old guard, was still there, and he remembered and welcomed me. My orders was to let you right in, sir, he greeted me. Just leave your bag here, and I'll have you sent straight up. I dropped my bag and trudged up the well-remembered path to the laboratory. It had been enlarged somewhat since I saw it last, and late though the hour was, there was a bustle in the air. I could see a number of men working in the building. From an area in the rear, which was lighted by huge floodlights, came the staccato tattoo of a riveter. I walked up to the front of the library. I can read. I can speak English. English is my first language. Can you believe it? I walked up to the front of the laboratory and entered. I knew the way to Carpenter's office, and I went directly there and knocked. Hello, First Mortgage, Jim Carpenter cried as I entered in response to his call. I'm glad to see you. Excuse the brusqueness of my first greeting to you over the telephone, but The press have been deviling me all day, every man jack of 'em trying to steal a march on the rest. But I open the whole shebang at 9 tomorrow, giving 'em all an equal chance to look things over before I turn the current on at noon. As soon as we have a little chat, I'll show you over the works." After a half-hour's chat, he rose. "Come along, First Mortgage. We'll go out and look the place over, and I'll explain everything. If my ideas work out, you'll have no chance to go over it tomorrow, so I want you to see it now." I had no chance to ask him what he meant by this remark, for he walked rapidly from the laboratory, and I perforce followed him. He led the way to the patch of lighted ground behind the building, where the riveting machine was still beating out its monotonous cacophony, and paused by the first of a series of huge reflectors, which were arranged in a circle. "Here's the start of the thing. 250 of these reflectors arranged in a circle 400 yards in diameter. Each of them's an open parabola of such spread that their beams will cover an area 10 yards in diameter at 50 miles above the Earth. If my calculations are correct, they should penetrate through the layer at an average speed of 15 miles an hour per unit, and by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the road to space ought to be open." "What's your power?" "Nothing but a concentration of infrared rays. Heaviside layer, as doubtless you'll know, it's a liquid. I think an organic one. If I'm right in that thought, the infrared will cut through it like a knife through cheese." "If it's a liquid, how do you prevent it from flowing back into the hole you've opened?" "When the current's first turned on, each reflector will bear on the same point. Notice they're movable. They're arranged so that they move together. As soon as the first hole's bored through, they'll move by clockwork, extending the opening till each point's vertically upward and the hole's 400 yards in diameter. Positive there will be no rapid flow even after the current's turned off. I believe the liquid's about as mobile as, say, petroleum jelly. Should it close, however, it only takes a couple hours to open it again with a space flyer, so we can return." "What space flyer?" "Well, the one we're going to be on, First Mortgage." "We?" "Oh, certainly. We. You and I. You didn't think I was going to send you alone, did you?" "Well, I didn't know that anyone was going." "Well, of course. Someone has to go, otherwise how'd I prove my point? I might cut through 100 holes, yet these stiff-necked fossils, seeing nothing, wouldn't believe. No, First Mortgage, when those arcs start working tomorrow, you and I'll be in a Hadley spaceship up at the bottom of the layer. As soon as the road's been opened, 2 of the lamps will cut off to allow us through. Then the battery will hold the road open while we pass out into space and return." "Suppose we meet with Hadley's fate?" We won't, even if I'm wrong, which is very unlikely. We won't meet with any such fate. We've got 2 stern motors and 4 bow motors. As soon as we meet with the slightest resistance to our forward progress, we'll stop and have twice the power, plus gravity, to send us earthwards. No danger connected with the trip. None at all. Promise." All the same, you're going. Man alive, think of the chance to make a world scoop for your paper. No other press man has the slightest inkling of my plan. Even if they had, there isn't another space flyer in the world that I know of. If you don't want to go, I'll give someone else a chance, but I prefer you. You know something of my work." I thought rapidly for a moment. The chance was a unique one, and one that half the pressmen in San Francisco would have given their shirts to get. I had my doubts of the accuracy of Jim Carpenter's reasoning while I was away from him, but there was no resisting the dynamic personality of the man when in his presence. "Oh, you win. Your threat of offering some of my hated rivals a chance definitely settled it." "Good boy," he exclaimed, pounding me on the back. "I knew you'd come. I had intended to take one of my assistants with me, but as soon as I knew you were here, I decided you were the man. There ought to be a press representative along, after all. Come with me, I'll show you the flyer." The flyer proved to be the same general type as had been used by Hadley. It was equipped with 6 rocket motors, 4 discharging to the bow and 2 to the stern. Any one of them, Carpenter said, was ample for motive power, equilibrium being maintained by means of a heavy gyroscope which would prevent any turning of the axis of its rotation. The entire flyer shell could be revolved about the axis, so the oblique motion with our bow and stern motors was readily possible. Direct lateral movement was provided for by valves which would divert a portion of the discharge of either a bow or stern motor out the side vents in any direction. The motive power, of course, was furnished by the atomic disintegration of powdered aluminum. The whole interior, except for the portion of the walls, roof, and floor which was taken up by vitrine windows, was heavily padded. At 9 the next morning, the gates to the enclosure were thrown open, and the representatives of the press were admitted. Jim Carpenter mounted a platform and explained briefly what he proposed to do, then broke the crowd up into small groups and sent them over the works with guides. When all had been taken around, they were reassembled, and Carpenter announced to them his intention of going up in a space flyer and prove, by going through the Heaviside layer, that it actually destroyed a portion of it. One moment. I have a notification. It's seemingly important. Apologies. My phone was very insistent I pay attention to that. It was making a very annoyed little noise at me. Anyway, destroyed a portion of it. That's where we were. There was an immediate clamor of applications to go with him, at which he laughingly announced that one reporter was all he could stand on the ship, that he was taking one of his former associates with him. I could tell by the envious looks with which I was favored that any popularity I'd ever had among my associates was gone forever. There was little time to think of such things, however, for the hour of our departure was approaching, and the photographers were clamoring for pictures of us and the flyer. We satisfied them at last, and I entered the flyer after Carpenter. We sealed the car up, started the air conditioner, and were ready for departure. "Scared, Pete?" asked Carpenter, his hand on the starting lever. I gulped a little as I looked at him. He was perfectly calm to a casual inspection, but I knew him well enough to interpret the little spots of red that appeared on his high cheekbones and the glitter in his eye. He may not have been as frightened as I was, but he was laboring under an enormous nervous strain. The mere fact that he called me Pete instead of his usual first mortgage showed that he was feeling pretty serious. "Oh, not exactly scared, but rather uneasy, so to speak." He laughed nervously at this. "Oh, cheer up, old man. If anything goes wrong, we won't know it. Sit down and get comfortable. This thing will start with quite the jerk." He pulled the starting lever forward suddenly, and I felt as though an intolerable weight were pressed against me, gluing me in my seat. The feeling lasted only for a moment, for he quickly eased up on the motor, and in a few moments I felt quite normal. "How fast are we going?" "Oh, only 200 miles an hour. We'll reach the layer in plenty of time at this rate. I don't want to jam into it. You can get up now." I rose, moved over to the observation glass on the floor, and looked down. We were already 5 or 10 miles above the earth, and we were ascending rapidly. I could still detect the great circle of reflectors with which our way was to be opened. "How do you tell where those heat beams are when they're turned on? Infrared rays aren't visible. We'll soon be out of sight of the reflectors." "Well, I forgot to mention I'm having a small portion of visible red rays mixed with the infrared so we can spot them. I've got a radio telephone here working on a private wavelength, so I can direct operations from here as well as from the ground. In fact, even better. Hey, if you're cold, turn on the heater." The friction of the flyer against the air had so far made up for the decreasing temperature of the air surrounding us, but a glance at the outside thermometer warned me that his suggestion was a wise one. I turned a valve which diverted a small portion of our exhaust through a heating coil in the flyer. It was hard to realize that I was actually in a rocket spaceship, the second one to be flown, and that, with the exception of the ill-fated Hadley, farther from the earth than any man had been before. There was no sensation of movement in the hermetically sealed flyer, and after the first few moments the steady drone of the rocket motor failed to register on my senses. I was surprised to see that there was no trail of detritus behind us. "Well, you can see our trail at night," replied Carpenter when I asked him about it. "But in daylight there's nothing to see. The slight luminosity of the gases is hidden by the sun's rays. Might be able to see it when we get out in space beyond the layer, but I don't know. But we've arrived at the bottom of the layer now, I believe. At any rate, we're losing velocity." I moved over to the instrument board and looked. Our speed had dropped to 110 miles an hour and was steadily falling off. Carpenter pulled the control lever and reduced our power. Gradually, the flyer came to a stop and hung, poised in space. He shut off the power an instant, and at once our indicator showed that we were falling, although very slowly. He promptly reapplied the power, and by careful adjustment, brought us again to a dead stop. Ready to go, and just on time, too, he remarked, looking at his watch. Take a glass and watch the ground. I'm going to have the heat turned on. I took the binoculars he indicated and turned them toward the ground while he gave a few crisp orders into his telephone. Presently, from the ground beneath us burst out a circle of red dots, from which long beams stabbed up into the heavens. The beams converged as they mounted until a point slightly below us, and a half-mile away they became one solid beam of red. One peculiarity I noticed was that, while they were plainly visible near the ground, they faded out, and it was not until they were a few miles below us they again became apparent. I followed their path upward into the heavens. Look here, Jim, something's happening. He sprang to my side and glanced at the beam. Hurrah! I was right. And he pounded me on the back at this. The fools call it a magnetic field. Upward the beam was boring its way, but it was almost concealed by a rain of fine particles of black which were falling around it. It's even more spectacular than I'd hoped. I'd expected to reduce the layer to such fluidity we could penetrate it or even to vaporize it. This is actually destroying it. Stuff's soot, and if proof be needed, the layer is an organic liquid. He turned to his telephone and communicated the momentous news to the Earth, and then rejoined me at the window. For 10 minutes we watched, and a slight diminution of the black cloud became apparent. Now they're through the layer. Watch, you'll see something. I'm going to start spreading the beam. He turned again to his telephone, and presently the beam began to widen and spread out. As it did so, the dark cloud became more dense than it had been before. The earth below us was hidden, and we could see the red as only a dim, murky glow through the falling soot. Carpenter inquired of the laboratory and found that we were completely invisible to the ground, half the heavens being hidden by the black pall. For an hour the beam worked its way about us and toward us. The hole's about 400 yards in diameter right now, said Carpenter as he turned from the telephone. I've told him to stop the movement of the reflectors. As soon as the air clears a little, we'll start through. It took another hour for the soot to clear enough that we could plainly detect the ring of red light before us. Carpenter gave some orders to the ground, and a gap 30 yards wide opened in the wall before us. Toward this gap the flyer moved slowly, under the side thrust of some diverted motor discharge. The temperature rose rapidly as we neared the wall of red light before us. Nearer we drew until the light was on both sides of us. Another few feet, and the flyer shot forward with a jerk that threw me sprawling on the floor. Carpenter fell too, but he maintained his hold on the controls and tore at them desperately to check us. I scrambled to my feet and watched. The red wall was alarmingly close. Nearer we drove, and then came another jerk which threw me sprawling again. The wall retreated. In another moment we were standing still, with the red all around us at a distance of about 200 yards. We had a narrow escape from being cremated, said Carpenter with a shaky laugh. I knew our speed would increase as soon as we got clear of the layer, but it caught me by surprise, just the same. I had no idea how great the holding effect of the stuff was. Well, First Mortgage, road to space is open for us. May I invite you to be my guest on a little weekend jaunt to the moon? No thanks, Jim. I think a little trip to the edge of the layer will quite satisfy me. Ah, you quitter. Say goodbye to familiar things. Here we go. He turned to the controls of the flyer, and presently we were moving again, this time away from the earth. There was no jerk at starting this time, merely a feeling as though the floor were pressing against my feet, a great deal like the feeling a person gets when they rise rapidly in an express elevator. The indicator showed we were only traveling 60 miles an hour. For half an hour we continued monotonously on our way, with nothing to divert us, and Carpenter yawned. Well, now that it's over, I feel let down and sleepy. We're well beyond the point to which Hadley penetrated. So far, we've met with no resistance. We're probably nearly at the outer edge of the layer. Think I'll shoot up a few miles more and then call it a day and go home. We're about 80 miles from the Earth now. Welcome, Raider. Happy to have you here. Hope you're enjoying the story. I looked down, but could see nothing below us but the dense cloud of black soot resulting from the destruction of the Heaviside layer. Like Carpenter, I too felt sleepy, and I suppressed a yawn as I turned again to the window.
Look here, Jim, what's that?
He moved in a leisurely manner to my side and looked out. As he did, I felt his hand tighten on my shoulder with a desperate grip. Down the wall of red which surrounded us was coming an object of some kind. The thing was fully 75 yards long and half as wide at its main position, while long, irregular streams extended for 100 yards on each side of it. There seemed to be dozens of them.
What is it, Jim?
I asked a voice which was sounding increasingly high and unnatural.
I don't know. Lord, there's another of them.
He pointed. Not far from the first of the things came another, even larger than the first. They were moving sluggishly along the red light, seeming to flow rather than to crawl. I had a horrible feeling they were alive and malignant. Carpenter stepped back to the controls of the flyer and stopped our movement. We hung in space, watching them. The things were almost level with us, but their sluggish movement was downward toward the earth. In color, they were brilliant crimson, deepening in purple near the center. Just as the first of them came opposite us, it paused, and slowly a portion of the mass extended itself from the main bulk, and then, like doors opening, 4 huge eyes, each of them 20 feet in diameter, opened and stared at us.
It's alive, Jim.
I hardly knew my own voice as I spoke. Library buddy, if you're gonna jump up and down off my leg, you gotta not be so pointy on the way. Oh. Library's been very sharp lately. I'm not quite sure why. I think it might be he's not using that scratching post of his. Because it's for both the cats, you know. But he's just so pointy. Maybe it's the jeans I've been wearing are a little thinner than my usual pair. Who knows? Either way, let's continue. Jim stepped back to the controls with a white face, and slowly we moved closer to the mass. As we approached, I thought I could detect a fleeting passage of expression in those huge eyes. Then they disappeared, and only a crimson and purple blob lay before us. Jim moved the controls again, and the flyer came to a stop. A new nestling has joined us. Thank you for the Prime sub, Raider O'Houlihan Alt 2. Really appreciate it. You got yourself your little founder badge. You've been thinking about that all weekend, you've been thinking about that all week, haven't you? Friendly reminder while we're at it, Raider has reminded me that if you subscribe with Twitch Prime or Twitch Gaming or Amazon Gaming or whatever it's called, essentially you connect your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account and you get a free sub. I get to enjoy the benefits of the sub on the back end, and you don't have to pay a dime. It's all Jeffrey Bezos's money that you're spending. Yes. So do feel free to subscribe free with Prime. You get 1 a month, and I'd be very flattered to see you spend them here. Oh, by the way, we do have emotes. I don't know if I made that clear. I do, in fact, have a few emotes uploaded. Raider also getting the first. First! I'm shocked nobody claimed first, honestly. First! You did it first! We do indeed have emotes. There are more emotes on the way, just as soon as Raz gets them completed. I have a few little ideas that I need to toss at her. But, you know, those are coming. I'm very excited to have little emotes. That emote that Raider is posting is a still from a pretty early YouTube video of mine where I'm like, oh, I'm like screaming about something. It's good. And there are more emotes on the way. For example, if you decide to subscribe at a higher tier, you know, which I don't think I've ever seen someone do. There's also this. There's this very agonized cat. I promise the actual, like, drawn emotes are gonna be much cooler. These ones are just, they are there because they make me laugh. That is my arm, by the way. I'm grabbing my neck as I scrim in high speed. Oh man, I just keep looking over at it like, yep, there it is. The list of teas. I did not finish the list of teas. Uh, it's a little mascotty. It's from a picture I took in high school. Someone had found that someone had like done that to try to make fun of our high school mascot. So that's why it looks so mascotty. Uh, your favorite tea? Do that one if you have it. I That gives me a couple options. There's that rooibos one that's got the Thai basil or the holy basil and the chamomile and the rooibos in it, or I could do some Earl Grey. I'm probably about to make Chad a train wreck. We take those. Uh, yeah, I might go Earl Grey. That's another favorite of mine. Earl Grey with lavender, doubly so. There's also a citrus mint licorice is another personal favorite. Raider has settled on Earl Grey to choose a tea. So I will make myself some Earl Grey at the break, and we will have that. Appreciate you testing some of the new channel point redeems. Where were we? We were we had just met the big horrifying thing. Oh, I don't know if y'all can see what's happening, but Gariki is very much testing a thing. Oh my gosh, 7 people named them. Somebody made 7 accounts called "Click on Me, Please." Don't click on those, by the way, if you see them in another chat. Also, I can't believe "Click on Me, Please" was not like an actual person's Twitch name, because that it uh seems like something that someone would do as a goof. Anyway, I digress. We can't see what's happening. That's probably for the best, Raider. Uh, anyway, yeah, the big horrifying goo monster is alive, and we're scared about it. That's where we were, I think. Let's continue. Jim stepped back to the controls with a white face, and slowly we moved closer to the mass. As we approached, I thought that I could detect a fleeting passage of expression in those huge eyes. Then they disappeared, and only a huge crimson and purple blob lay before us. Jim moved the controls again, and the flyer came to a stop. 2 long streamers moved out from the mass. Suddenly there was a jerk to the ship which threw us both to the floor. It started upward at express train speed. Jim staggered to his feet, grasped the controls, and started all 4 bow motors at full capacity, but even this enormous force had not the slightest effect in diminishing our speed. "Well, the thing's got us, whatever it is," said Jim as he pulled his controls to neutral, shutting off all power. Now that the danger had assumed a tangible form, he appeared as cool and collected as ever, to my surprise, and I found that I'd recovered control of my muscles and of my voice. I became aware that the shoulder which Jim had gripped was aching badly, and I rubbed it absent-mindedly. "What is it, Jim?" "I don't know. Some horrible inhabitant of space, something unknown to us on Earth, obviously. From its appearance and actions, it must be a huge single-celled animal, the type of the earthly amoeba. If an amoeba is that large here, what must an elephant look like? I expect we'll learn more about the matter later. It's taking us with it, wherever it's going." Suddenly, the flyer became dark inside. I looked at the nearest window, but I could not even detect its outline. I reached for the light switch, but a sudden change in direction threw me against the wall. There was an instant of intense heat in the flyer. Oh, we've passed the Heaviside layer, and the brute's changed direction. We felt that heat when he took us through the infrared wall. I reached again for the light switch, but before I could find it, our motion ceased, and an instant later the flyer was filled with glaring sunlight. We both turned to the window, and found that we lay on a glistening plain of bluish hue, which stretched without a break as far as we could see. Not a thing broke the monotony of our vision. We turned to the opposite window. How can I describe the sight which met our horrified gaze? On the plain before us lay a huge purple monstrosity of gargantuan dimensions. The thing was a shapeless mass, only the 4 huge eyes standing out regarding us balefully. The mass was continually changing its outline, and as we watched, a long streamer extended itself from the body toward us. Over and around the flyer the feeler went, while green and red colors played over first one and then another of the huge eyes before us. The feeler wrapped itself around the flyer, and we were lifted into the air toward those horrible eyes. We had almost reached them when the thing dropped us. We fell to the plain with a crash. Staggering to our feet again, we looked out, and our captor was clearly battling for its life. Its attacker was a smaller thing of a brilliant green hue, striped and mottled with blue and yellow. While our captor was almost formless, the newcomer had a very definite shape. It resembled a cross between a bird and a lizard, its shape resembling a bird, as did tiny rudimentary wings and a long beak, while the scaly covering and the fact that it had 4 legs instead of 2 bore out the idea it might be a lizard. Its huge bird-like beak was armed with 3 long rows of sharp teeth, with which it was tearing at our captor. The purple amoeba was holding its assailant with a dozen of its thrown-out feelers, which were wrapped about the body and legs of the green horror. The whole battle was being conducted in absolute silence.
Now's our chance, Jim. Get away from here while the dragon has the amoeba busy.
He jumped the control levers of the flyer and pulled the starting switch well forward. The shock of the sudden start hurled me to the floor, but from where I fell I was able to watch the battle on the plain below us. It raged with uninterrupted fury, and I felt certain of our escape when, with a shock that hurled both Jim and I to the ceiling, the flyer stopped. We fell back to the floor, and I reflected that it was well for us that the interior of the flyer had been so well padded. Had it not been, our bones would have been broken a dozen times by the shocks to which we'd been subjected. You're right, Raider. No slouching. Posture.
What now?
Another of those purple amoebas, replied Jim from the vantage point of a window. He's looking over us as if he's trying to decide whether we're edible or not. So I joined him at the window. The thing which had us was a replica of the monster which we'd left below us, engaged in battle with the green dragon that had attacked it. The same indefinite and ever-changing outline was evident, as well as the huge 4 eyes. The thing regarded us for a moment, and slowly moved us up against its bulk until we touched it. Deeper and deeper into the mass of the body we penetrated until we were in a deep cavern with a light coming to us only from the entrance. I watched the entrance, and the horror possessed my soul.
The hole's closing, Jim. The thing's swallowing us.
This goes for future hydrate commands, by the way. Hardly suggest you drink along with me. It's good for you. Water's important. Anyway. No one expected that. The amoeba's got no mouth, you know. Nourishment's passed to the body through the skin, which closes behind it. We're a modern version of Jonah and the whale, First Mortgage.
Well, Jonah got out.
We'll try to. When that critter swallowed us, he's got something that'll prove pretty indigestible. Let's try and give him a stomachache. I don't suppose a machine gun will affect him, but we'll try it.
I didn't know you had any guns on board.
Oh, yes, I've got 2 machine guns. We'll turn one of them loose, but I don't expect much effect from it. He moved over to one of the guns and threw off the cover which had hidden it from my gaze. He fed in a belt of ammunition and pulled his trigger. For half a minute he held it down, and 250 caliber 30 bullets tore their way into space. There was no evidence of movement on the part of our host. Just as I thought, remarked Jim as he threw aside the empty belt and covered the gun again. Thing's probably got no nervous organization to speak of, and probably never felt that. We'll have to rig up a disintegrating ray for him.
What?
A disintegrating ray. Oh, yes, I know how to make the fabulous death ray that you journalists are always raving about. Never announced my discovery. War's horrible enough without it, but I've generated it, used it in my work a number of times. Did it never occur to you that rocket motors built on a disintegrating ray principle?
Well, of course it is, Jim. I never thought of it in that light before, but it must be. How can you use it? The discharge from the motors is a harmless stream of energy particles.
Instead of turning the ray into powdered aluminum and breaking it down, was to prevent me from turning it against the body of our captor and blasting my way out.
I don't know.
Nothing is. I'll have to modify one of the motors a little. It's not a hard job, though. Get some wrenches from the toolbox. We'll get started. An hour of hard work enabled us to disconnect one of the reserve bow motors, and after the modifications Jim had mentioned, turn the ray out through the port, through which the products of disintegration were meant to go. When we bolted it in place with an improvised coupling, Jim opened the vitrine screen, which held in our air, and turned to his control board. Well, here goes. He pulled the lever to full power, and with a roar which almost deafened us on the small flyer, the ray leapt out to do its deadly work. I watched the report beside the motor. There was a flash of intense light for an instant, and then the motor died away in silence. A path to freedom lay open before us. Jim started one of the stern motors, and slowly we forced our way through the hole torn in a living mass. When we were almost at the surface, he threw in full power, and we shot free from the amoeba into the open. Again we were stopped in midair and drawn back toward the huge bulk. The eyes looked at us, and we returned around. As the ray swung into a position to point directly toward one of the eyes, Jim pulled the controlling lever, and with the flash of light which ensued, the eye and a portion of the surrounding tissue disappeared. The amoeba writhed and changed shape rapidly, while flashes of brilliant crimson played over the remaining eyes. Again the ray was brought into play, and another of the eyes disappeared. This was evidently enough for our captor, for it suddenly released us, and instantly we started to fall. Jim caught the control levers and turned on our power in time to halt us only a few feet above the plane toward which we were falling. We were close to the point whence we'd started up, and we could see that the battle below us was still raging. The green dragon was partially engulfed by the amoeba, but it still relentlessly tore off huge chunks and devoured them. The amoeba was greatly reduced in bulk, but it still fought gamely. Even as we approached the dragon, it was evidently satiated, for it slowly withdrew from the purple bulk and back away. Long feelers shot out from the amoeba's bulk toward the dragon, but they were bitten off before they could grasp their prey.
Let's get away from here, Jim,
I cried, but I spoke too late. Even as the words left my mouth, the green dragon saw us and raised itself in the air with gaping jaws poised as it launched itself up at us. It took Jim only a moment to shoot the flyer up into space, and the charge passed harmlessly beneath us. The dragon checked its headway and turned again toward us. Use the machine gun, Pete. I've got to run the ship. I threw the cover off the gun and fed in a fresh belt of ammunition. As the green monster dashed toward us, I hastily aligned the gun and pulled the trigger. My aim was good. At least 50 of the bullets plowed through the approaching bulk before Jim dropped the ship and allowed it to pass above us. Again the dragon turned in charge, and again I met it with a hail of bullets. They had no apparent effect, and Jim dropped the ship again and let the huge bulk shoot by above us. Twice more the dragon rushed, but the last rush was less violent than had been the first three. The bullets are affecting him, Pete. Give him another dose. I hastily fed in another belt, but it wasn't needed. The dragon rushed the 5th time, but before it reached us, its velocity fell off, and it passed harmlessly below us and fell on a long curve to the plain below. It fell near the purple amoeba which it had battled, and a long feeler shot out and grasped it. Straight into the purple mass it was drawn and vanished into the huge bulk. Jim started one of the stern motors, and in a few seconds we were far from the scene.
Have you any idea of which direction to go?
Have you got have you an idea of which direction to go? He asked, and I shook my head.
Have you a radio beacon?
He withered me with a glance at this question. We're beyond the Heaviside layer, he reminded me. For a moment I was stunned. We can't be very far from the hole, he said, consolingly as he fumbled with the controls. But before we try to find it, we'd better disconnect one of the stern motors and rig it as a disintegrating ray, so we've got one bearing in each direction. We may meet many more denizens of space who like our looks, and, well, we haven't much ammunition left. We landed on the plane, and in an hour had a second disintegrating ray ready for action. And so, thus armed, we rose from the blue plane and started at random on our way. For 10 minutes we went forward. Then Jim stopped the flyer and returned back. We'd gone only a short distance when I called him to stop. What is it? He demanded as he brought the flyer to a standstill.
There's another creature ahead of us. A red one.
Red? He asked excitedly as he joined me. About a mile ahead of us, a huge mass hung in the air. It resembled the amoeba which had attacked us, but this newcomer was red. As we watched, it moved toward us, and as it did so, its color changed to purple. Hurrah! Don't you remember, Pete? The one which captured us, took us out of the hole, was red in the hole, and then turned purple? That thing just came out of the hole.
Then why can't we see the red beam?
There's no air or anything to reflect it. Can't see it until we're right in it. I devoutly hoped that he was right as he headed the ship toward the waiting monster. As we approached, the amoeba came rapidly to meet us, and a long feeler shot out. As it did so, there was a flash of intense light ahead of us, as Jim turned loose the ray, and the feeler disappeared. Another and another met the same fate. Then Jim rotated the ship slightly, and let out the full force of the ray toward the monster. A huge hole was torn in it, and we approached with our ray blazing. The amoeba slowly retreated. Our path was open before us. Again there was an instant of intense heat as we passed through the red wall, and we were again in the hole which Jim's lamps had blasted through the layer. Below us lay the fog which had obscured the earth when we started on our upward trip. Down toward the distant earth we dropped. We'd gone about 30 miles before we saw on the side of the hole one of the huge amoeba which were so thick above. Well, we might stop and pick the fellow off, but on the whole I think we'll experiment with him. He drove the ship nearer and turned on its axis, holding it in position by one of the auxiliary discharges. A flash came from our forward ray, and a portion of the amoeba disappeared. A long arm moved out toward us, but it moved slowly and sluggishly instead of the lightning-like swiftness which the other movements had been characterized with. Jimmy easily eluded it and dropped the ship a few yards. The creature pursued it, but it moved slowly. For a mile we kept our distance ahead of it, but we had to constantly decrease our speed to keep from leaving it behind. Soon we were almost at a standstill, and Jim reversed our direction and drew nearer. A feeler came slowly and feebly out a few feet toward us, then stopped. We dropped the ship a few feet, but the amoeba didn't follow. Jim glanced at the altimeter. Just as I thought. We're about 45 miles above the earth. Already the air is so dense the thing can't move lower. They're fashioned for existence in regions of space. Even in the most rarefied air, they're helpless. There's no chance of one ever reaching the surface of the earth without years of gradual acclimation. Even if it did, it'd be practically immobile. In a few years, the layer will flow enough to plug the hole I've made, but even so, I'll build a couple space flyers equipped with disintegrating rays as soon as we get down, and station them alongside the hole to wipe out any of the space vermin that try to come through. Let's go home. We've put in a great day's work. Hundreds of the purple amoeba have been destroyed by the guarding ships during the last 5 years. The hole is filling in, as Jim predicted, and in another 10 years the Earth will be as securely walled in as it ever was. But in the meantime, no one knows what unrevealed horrors space holds, and the world will never rest entirely easy until the slow process of time again heals that broken protective layer. That was a fun little science fiction romp, if you ask me. Sure, you couldn't set it on the Earth anymore, but you could definitely set it on like just some exoplanet, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, my disbelief suspended." You know, I think that's a really fun concept. It's like, "Oh, the Earth has been shielded from all manners of terrifying, horrible space life." Fascinating. Oh, this is the beginning of a three-part novel. The next one, Earth the Marauder by Arthur J. Barks. So this is another one of those piecemeal stories. Uh, I'm curious to see how this opening part of three goes. With his foreword. Despite the fact that for centuries the secret of life had been the possession of children of men, the earth was dying. She was dying because the warmth of the sun was fading, because with the obliteration of the oceans, in order to find new land upon which man might live, her seasons had become stormy, unbearably cold and dreary. The very fact of her knowledge of the secret of life, in which men numbered their ages by centuries instead of years, was her undoing. For when men did not die, they multiplied beyond all counting, beyond all possibility of securing permanent abiding places. One man, in the days when earth was young, a man lived at best to the age of 70 years, could have given time and opportunity, populated a nation. Now, when men lived for centuries, eternally youthful, their living descendants ran into incalculable numbers. The earth, in a strange paradox, was dying because it had learned the secret of life. 20 centuries before, the last war of aggression had been fought in order that an overpopulated nation might find room in which to live. Now all the earth was one nation, speaking one tongue. There were no more lands to conquer. Chapter 1. Sarka. In his laboratory, atop the highest peak in the venerable Himalayas, lived Sarka, conceded by the world to be its greatest scientist despite his youth. His grandfather, who had watched the passing of 18 centuries, had discovered the secret of life, and thoughtlessly, in light of later developments, broadcast his discovery to the world. The genius of this man, who was also called Sarka, had been passed on to his son, Sarka II, and by him in even greater degree to Sarka III, called merely Sarka for the purposes of this history. Had Sarka lived in the days before the discovery of the secret of life, people of that day would have judged him a young man of 20. His real age was 4 centuries. Behind him, as he sat moodily staring at the gigantic revolving barrel, stood a woman of most striking appearance. Her name was Yaska, and according to ideas of the days before the discovery, she seemed a trifle younger than Sarka. Her hand, unadorned by jewelry of any kind, rested on Sarka's shoulder as he studied the revolving barrel, while her eyes, whose lashes, matching her raven hair, were like the wings of tiny blackbirds, noted afresh the wonder of this man. "What is there to be done?" she asked him at last, and her voice was like music there in the room where science performed its miracles for Sarka. Wearily, Sarka turned to face her, and she was struck anew, as she had been down the years since she had known this man. Every time their glances met, the mighty curve of his brow, which rendered insignificant his mouth, his delicate nose of twitching nostrils, the well-deep eyes of him. "Something must be done, and that soon, for unless the children of men are provided with some manner of territorial expansion, they will destroy one another. Only the strongest will survive, and we shall return to the days when waters covered the earth and monstrous creatures bellowed from the primeval slime." "You're working on something?" For a moment he didn't answer. While she waited, Yaska peered into the depths of the revolving barrel, which represented the earth. It was 50 feet in diameter, and its curved surface and entrancing depths was mirrored, in this latest development of Teleview, all the earth and doings of its people. But Yaska scarcely saw the fleeting images, the men locked in conflict for the right to live, the screaming, terror-stricken women. This was now a century-old story, and the civilization of Earth had almost reached the breaking point. No, she scarcely saw the things in the barrel, for she had read the hint of a vast, awesome secret in the eyes of Sarka, and wondered if he dared even tell her. If people knew, they would do one of two things. They would tear me limb from limb and hurl the parts of me outward into space forever, or they would demand that I move before I am ready, and cause a catastrophe which could never be rectified. This grand old Earth of ours would be dead indeed.
And this secret of yours?
Yaska now spoke in the sign language which only these two knew, for there were billions of other revolving barrels in the world, and words could be heard by universal radio by anyone who cared to listen. And always they knew the legions of enemies of Sarka kept their ears open for words of Sarka which could be twisted around to his undoing. I should not tell even you, he answered, his fingers working swiftly in their secret, silent language, which all the world could see, but which only these two understood. For if my enemies knew that you possessed the information, there's nothing they would stop at to make you tell.
But I would not tell, Sarka. You know that.
He patted her hands, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, you would not tell. Some day soon, and it must be soon, if the children of men are not to destroy themselves, I tell you. It's a secret which lies heavily on my heart. If I should make a mistake, chaos, catastrophe, eternal, perpetual dark, the children of men reduced to nothingness. A little gasp from Yaska, for it was plain that this thing Sarka hinted at was far and away beyond anything he had hitherto done, and Sarka had already performed miracles beyond any that had been done by his predecessors. When my father perfected in this self-same laboratory the machinery by which the waters of the ocean could be disintegrated, our enemies found him mad and fought their way up to these mountain slopes to destroy him. With a pack at his doors, he did as he told them he would do. Though they hurried swiftly into the great valleys to colonize them where oceans had been, they were like ravening beasts and gave my grandfather no thanks. Our people have always fought against progress, have always been disparaging of its advocates. When the first Sarka discovered the secret, they would have destroyed him, though he made them immortal.
If only the secret could be returned to him who discovered it. That would solve our problem, for men then would die and be buried, leaving their places for others.
Again that weary smile on the face of Sarka. Take back the secret which is known today to every son and daughter of woman? Oh, impossible. More nearly impossible than the attainment of my most ambitious dream.
And what is that dream?
I've wondered about you, Sarka said softly, while those eyes of his bored deeply into hers. We've been the best of friends, the best of comrades, but there are times when it comes to me that I do not know you entirely. I have many enemies.
You mean,
gasped the woman, for the moment forgetting the secret sign manual.
You think it possible that I might be one of your enemies in secret?
Yaska, I do not know, but in this matter in my mind I trust no one. I'm afraid even that people will read my very thoughts, though I have learned to so concentrate upon them that not the slightest hint of them shall go forth telepathically to my enemies. I do not mind death for myself, but our people must be saved. It is hideous to think that we've been given the secret of life, only to perish in the end because of it. I'm sorry, Yaska, but I can tell no one. But Yaska, one of the most beautiful and intelligent of Earth's beautiful and intelligent women, seemed not to be listening to Sarka at all, and when he'd finished, she shrugged her shoulders slightly and prepared to leave. He followed her to the nearest exit dome, built solidly into the side of his laboratory, and watched her as she slipped swiftly into the white skin-tight clothing, marked on the chest and the back with the red lily of the House of Cleric. Her eyes were still deeply moody. He helped her don the gleaming metal helmet, in whose skull pan was set the anti-gravitational ovoid, invented by Sarka II, used now of necessity by every human creature, and strode with her to the outer exit, a door of ponderous metal sufficiently strong to prevent the inner warmth of the laboratory getting out, or the biting colds of the heights to enter, and studied her still as she buckled about her hips her own personal sarka belt, which automatically encased her, through contact with her tight clothing, with a warmth and balanced pressure of the laboratory which would remain constant as long as she wore it. With a nod and a brief smile, she stepped to the metal door and vanished through it. Sark turned gloomily back to his laboratory, looking into the depths of the revolving barrel and adjusting the enlarging device which brought back life-size the infinitesimal individuals mirrored in the barrel. He watched her go, a trim white figure which flashed across the void from mountain top to her valley home like a very white projectile from another world, very white and very precious. But when she was home and had waved to him that she had arrived safely, he forgot her for a time and allowed his eyes to study those inner workings of this vast, crowded world whose onrushing fate was so filling his brain with doubt, with fear, and with something of horror. Ugh. Depending on how long this chapter is, we might have a BRB coming up. If this chapter's short, it'll be after chapter 3. But we'll see. We'll find out together. Either way, chapter 2, The People of the Hives. Moodily, Sarka stared into the depths of the barrel which represented the earth, and in which he could see everything that the earthlings did after visually enlarging them through use of a microscope that could be adjusted with relation to the barrel to bring out in detail any section of the world he wished to study. His face, as he did this, was utterly sad. The people at last truly possessed the earth, all of it that it was, even with the aid of every miracle known to science, habitable. The earth, the surface of the earth, was one vast building, like a hive, and to each human being was allotted by law a certain abiding place. But men no longer died, unless they desired to do so, and then only when the spokesman of the gens saw fit to grant permission. There would soon be no place for the newborn to live, even now that point had practically been reached throughout the world, and in the greater portion it had been reached and passed, and men knew that while men did not die, they could be killed. The vast building, towering above what once had been the surface of the earth to heights undreamed of before the discovery, was irregular on its top to fit the contour of the earth, and its roof, constructed of materials gained from the earth's core, was so designed as to catch and concentrate the yearly more feeble rays of the sun, so that its life-giving warmth might continue to be the boon of living people. It had been found as earth cooled that life was possible to a depth of 8 miles below the one-time surface, so that the one huge building extended below the surface to this great depth, and was divided and redivided to make homes for men, their wives, and their progeny. But even so, space was limited. Neighboring families outgrew their surroundings, overflowed into the habitations of their neighbors, and every family was at constant war against its own neighbors. Men did not die, but they could be slain. There was scarcely a home above or below in all the vast building which had not planned and executed murder times and times again, or which had not left its own blood in the dwelling places of neighbors. No law could cope with the intolerable situation, for men, down the ages, had changed in their essential characteristics but little, and recognized one law only in their extremity, that of self-preservation. So there was murder rampant, and mothers who wept for children, husbands, fathers, or mothers who would never return to their homes. "My grandfather," whispered Sarka, his eyes peering deeply into a certain area beyond that assigned by law to the house of cleric, where men of 2 neighboring families were locked in mortal silent conflict, "should not have frustrated the mad scheme of Dalis. It was slaughter, wholesale and terrible, but it would have cleansed the souls of survivors." Mentally, Sarka was looking back now to that red day when Dalis, the closest scientific rival of Sarka I, had come to Sarka I with his proposal, which at the time seemed so hideous. Sarka remembered that interval in all its details, for he'd heard it many times. Sarka, Dalis had said. Oh, he has a high-pitched voice. Sarka, Dalis had said in his high-pitched voice, staring at Sarka I out of red-rimmed, fiery eyes. Unless something is done, the world will rush on to self-destruction. Men will slay one another, fathers will kill their sons, and sons their fathers if nothing's not done. For always there's marrying and giving in marriage, and each family's reaching out in all directions, seeking merely space in which to live. Formerly there were wars which automatically took thought of the overplus of men, but today the world is at peace, as men regard the term, and every man's hand is against his neighbor. There'll be no more wars when there should be. There's but one alternative. And that being? The segregation of the fittest. The destruction, swiftly, painlessly, of all the others. When the survivors have again repopulated the earth to overflowing, a repetition of the same corrective. Men will die, yes, by millions, but those who are left will be a stronger, sturdier race, and by this process of elimination, century by century, men will evolve and become Supermen. And this plan of yours? Alright, I'm going to call a disclaimer here. These books are old and play with ideas that may shock and appall the modern reader. I have a longer statement on that matter below me in the Twitch chat here, or below me on Twitch here in my About section, where the panels live. But long story short, I won't be censoring these. Sometimes the shock value is valuable, especially when it's placed in context. And I am not authoritative in my understanding of everything I'm reading, and so therefore cannot make what I would describe as a good faith effort to translate the past being a foreign country. You know what I mean? This one coming in pretty well with 13% for time to disclaimer. About an hour and 17 minutes. That's pretty good. I mean, it's not better than A Crystal Age, which we managed to get through most of that book for time to disclaimer. But that's a little game we play around here. How long does it take a book to make me go, we might need the disclaimer? And this one's time to disclaimer is about an hour and 17 minutes. There we go. For a moment, Dali had paused, breathing heavily, as almost afraid to continue. Then, while Sarka I had listened in frozen terror, Dali had explained his ghastly scheme. If it were not for the mountains and the valleys, the world were perfectly round and smooth of surface. That surface would be covered by water to the depth of 1 mile. Is that not correct? The Earth, rotating on its axis, it travels about the sun at the rate of something like 19 miles per second, so perfectly balanced that the oceans remain almost quiescent in their beds. But Sarka, mark me well. If we could together devise a way to halt this rotation for as much as a few seconds, what would happen? What would happen? Replied Sarka I, dropping his own voice to a husky, frightened whisper. Why, the oceans would be hurled out of their beds, and a wall of water a mile high or more, it's all guesswork, would rush eastward around the world, bearing everything before it. It would uproot and destroy buildings, sweep the rocky covering of the earth free of soil, and humanity, caught on the earth below the highest level of the world's greatest tidal wave, would be engulfed. Exactly, Dali had said with a grin. Exactly. Only the people we wish to survive could be warned, and these could be either aloft when the tidal wave swept the face of the earth, or could safely be out of reach of the waters on the sides of the highest mountains. Sarka I, wanly smiling, catching his breath at last, now that he had realized the utter impossibility of this mad scheme, had been minded to humor the fancies of a man whom he believed not quite sane. Why not? Why not, he began, take away from men the secret of life so that they will die as formerly when the world was young?
when all the world knows the secret, when even children learn it before they're capable of walking? Demanded Dali sarcastically. You could only remove the knowledge of the secret from the brains of men by removing those brains themselves. Your thought's more terrible even than mine because it leads to this inescapable conclusion. But supposing for a moment your mad scheme was possible, who should it say,
but supposing for a moment your mad scheme was possible, who could say whom of all the earth's people should be saved, whom sacrificed?
What better test could be given than that which I am proposing? Those worthy of being saved would save themselves. Those who would perish would not be worth saving. As natural, as inescapable as the law of the survival of the fittest, which has been an axiom of life since men first crawled out of the slime and asked each other questions as they caught their first glimpses of the stars and pondered the reasons for them.
But where, then, was any point in my giving to people the secret of life?
Had you paused to think, you would never have done so. Your lust for power, for fame, it destroyed your foresight.
And is it not, Dali, for this really that you've come to me? To berate me? To throw at my head mad schemes impossible of accomplishment? I've always known you for an enemy, Dali, because you are envious of what I've accomplished, which you sense I will accomplish as time passes.
I do not love you, Saka. I despise you, hate you, but I need the aid of that keen brain of yours. You see, hate you though I may, I do have honor still. I have something up here,
Tapping the dome of his brow, only less lofty of that of Sarka,
which you lack. You have something I have not and never can attain, but together we're complements, each of the other, and to the two of us this scheme is possible.
I'm very busy, Dali. I must ask you to leave me. What you propose is impossible, unthinkable.
Excuse me, sir. That has been the standard signal for turn around the whole time you've been with me. You do not need to get that upset with me. Oh, you're just mad because I'm not petting you. That's what's up. I see. I see. I stopped petting you for 5 seconds. It's the end of the world. Hey! No more pets for you. You're being rude tonight.
Anyway, scheme is possible. That's where unthinkable.
So, you think me mad? You think me incapable of perfecting this plan about whose details you've not even been informed? You would show me the door as though you were a king and I a slave, when kings and slaves vanished from the earth millenniums ago. Then listen to me, Sarka. I know how to do this thing about which I've told you. I can halt for a brief moment only the whirl of the earth about its axis, and by so doing I can flood the earth with the waters of the ocean. If you will not listen to me, I shall do it myself. You shall have 2 days for which to give me an answer, for I admit I need you who would balance me to make sure I made no fatal mistakes. But if you do not, I will act along the lines I've hinted.
Apparently, as unconcerned as though he had not just listened to a scheme for almost total depopulation of the world, the destruction of millions upon millions of lives, Sarkar I had dismissed Dali, who had straightway used all his offices to arouse the world of science against the first Sarka. But when the 2 days of grace given by Dali had passed, there were no oceans, for Sarkar I had been planning for a century against the time when the earth must of necessity be overpopulated, and had worked and slaved in his laboratory against the contingency which he had developed. He had smiled, though there was a trace of fear on his face after Dali had left, for his scheme had been worked out, not to destroy, but to save. And from this same laboratory in which Sarka now sat and pondered on the next step in the man's expansion, Sarka I had, in fear and trembling at first, but with his confidence growing by leaps and bounds, worked his own miracle. Untold millions and billions of rays, whose any portion of which, coming in contact with water, immediately separated its hydrogen and oxygen, thus disintegrating its molecules, were hurled forth from their storehouses beneath the laboratory, across the faces of the mighty oceans of earth. And when men saw the miracle, they rushed into the mighty valleys where the oceans had been, and began to build new homes. that had been centuries ago, scores of centuries. Now all the earth, all the livable part of the earth, above its surface and below it to the depths of miles, was filled with people, like bees in a monstrous hive, ants of antiquity in their warrened hills, and there was no place to go now. So they fought among themselves for the right to live. But my grandfather was right, Sarka almost screamed it, speaking aloud in the silence of his laboratory. My grandfather was right. Dali was wrong. Science should be the science of life, not of death. Yet whither shall we go? Where now shall we find pieces for our people, who are daily being born in myriads to love, to live, and to flourish? But there was no answer, only the humming of the perpetually revolving barrel, which showed to the sad eyes of Sarka that the people of his beloved earth were rushing onward to chaos unless... If only I could be sure about Yaska. If only my courage were as great as that of which I stand in need. For if I fail, even Dali, had he succeeded with that scheme of his in grandfather's time, would be less a monster, less a criminal indeed. Alright, chapter 2 took its time there, so I think it's about time for a little intermission. We will be right back. Now is a fantastic time to have a little break yourself. Stretch, get hydrated, take any necessary medications if you've got them, pet your animals for me. Absolutely do pet your animals for me. And remember, if you're petting your animals for me and you have the ability to send me a photograph, feel free to join the Discord and drop those pet photos in there. Once again, heartily suggest you hydrate along with me, and now is a great time to get more water, because that's most of what I'm going to be doing. I will be back in about 15 minutes with some Earl Grey tea, as suggested by Raider. Everyone have a great little BRB. Make sure you're well stretched and ready for more of this particular story from Astounding Stories when we come back. I'll be about 15 Oh, how long's the music been out? I thought I picked enough music to make it last. Oops. How long's the music been out? What? Can I see the list I'm playing? Yeah, could I see the list, please? Is that a thing I can see, maybe? I specifically picked a list of things, and I would like to know how long the list of said things is. Is that allowed? Oh, that's only like 5 minutes of sounds. What the heck? I need to library. Ow. Oh. Yo, he just completely missed. He like went to jump up on my leg and both sets of his little legs completely missed my leg. And so he dug in on either side of my thigh. Oh. Oh. That was very unpleasant. I'm so glad the camera was not on for that. Let me tell you, that was rough. Okay, let's get back into it. First off, Raider, I believe you requested some tea. This is probably the last steep those Earl Grey leaves had. Despite the fact that this is definitely the last steep those leaves had, this is still a really, really fantastic black tea. This is a really fantastic Earl Grey. It has some lavender in, and so that like is an additional flavor component. The lavender actually has much more oomph to it than the Earl Grey and the black tea at this point. Because I had already steeped these like 3 or 4 times before. Um, what else? Yeah, it's got some really really fun bergamot notes. It's for once a really good black tea underneath all the bergamot. Which usually, an Earl Grey is sold with very cheap black tea underneath all the bergamot oil because, you're tasting the bergamot oil first and foremost, and most people don't use their tea leaves more than once. Even like loose leaf teas, you use them like 2, maybe 3 times at a stretch, and like the bergamot has enough oomph and chutzpah with it to let that happen. But this one, yeah, we've used it enough times that I am tasting the black tea more than the bergamot. Very pleasant. I am also just so tempted to go get like another bag of like just Earl Grey tea and make some ice cream with it. Like get a little like sampler size bag of like some Earl Grey tea from a tea shop that I know is good and use that to make Earl Grey ice cream. I saw somebody online doing that. They like steeped the leaves in like the heavy cream or maybe it was the heavy cream and excuse me. Yeah, they had steeped the leaves in the heavy cream, and that was the flavorant. And as soon as they said, "Oh yeah, this one's got a really deep flavor to it. It doesn't taste like Fruit Loops," which bergamot, as it weakens, really presents with a Fruit Loops flavor. Presents the same profile as a Fruit Loop does. Like strong bergamot has other like flavor components and notes to it that overwhelm the fact that it tastes a little bit like a Fruit Loop. But um, weak bergamot flavoring, especially if you don't steep your Earl Grey long enough, it just tastes kind of Fruit Loopy, which is not awful, but like not what you want. I guess if you specifically were looking to like do a less like sugary Fruit Loop flavor, you could do like a light sheen of bergamot, so to speak. I digress. This is a really good tea. This is from a shop up in Seattle that kind of has a fun little steampunk theme going on. It's also where I got that one with the rooibos and the holy basil and the chamomile. It's very good. I've been thinking about getting some tea shipped from that shop to Raz because, well, but her tea cabinet is even worse than mine, so maybe not. But it's something I've been thinking about definitely. Anyway, let us. Also, I should alter the pick a tea command. Can I do that from here while I'm thinking about it? And while I'm trying to do so, um, I should mention I should mention the fact that I am on a Twitch team, and it is called Codex. It is a group of reading streamers. We all kind of uh, try to, cross pollinate each other's audiences. We do group projects. A recent group project that I really, really liked, and probably was the other half of why the affiliate push worked so well when Ragged World rolled in and was like, "Hi, I have 11 viewers for you." Um, I had two streams in a row where 10 to 11 people showed up because of this last group project we did, which was a raid train. And I really liked that. We had done like a relay race red. Uh, we had relay race red. What's A Christmas Carol? Thank you. That my brain did just completely. Yeah, just completely blanked out for a minute there. And it's really great. I think there's some really great people in there, and we kind of all cover a pretty wide gamut of genres. I tend to lead science fiction. There's a couple people who do fantasy stories. Gariki kind of does fairy tales and that sort of thing. Jev was recently doing Doctor Dolittle. She has a completely different set of books available, being from a completely different country. Uh, it, Long story short, if you like what I do, you're gonna love the people in the Codex. There's a monthly book club. I think there's a self-help book the name of is genuinely escapes me for this month, and uh, or for this coming thing, which book club is soon, I think. Check out the Codex Discord for that. They have all the lore over there. I don't keep it in my head as well as I should. They're great folks. If you like paper cuts, you'll like them. Let's have another little sip of our tea here and then keep reading, shall we? Spilma? Spilma tea. Thought I was free from the curse of Spilma. But alas, no, I am not freed from Spilma. I recommend InfoZar if you're looking. Hmm? Did I miss someone in chat? Eh? Where? Gariki might be tuned to the wrong chat. He tends to moderate several people at once because he's very good at it. Oh, that's weird. Oh, oh. We're a little enter the Matrix tonight. Anyway, I digress a great deal. Let's continue. Chapter 3, The Spokesman of the Gens. For a long moment, Sarko looked broodingly out across the world beyond the metallized glass which formed the curving dome of his laboratory roof. There was little that could be seen, for always the mighty cold winds, ruffled with flurries of snow and particles of ice, swept over this artificial roof of the world. Here and there, huge portions of the area within the range of his normal vision were swept clear and clean of snow and ice, and looked bluely, bitterly cold and hostile. You thought it was real raid hours. No, we've got some reading left. Understandable guess though. Yeah, Gariki's a very very good multitasker. He is an invaluable part of the team over here. Great mod. Without the Sarka belts, people who ventured forth from their hives would instantly freeze to the consistency of marble in those winds and storms. For the people of Earth had built their monster habitation toward the stars until they reached up into the altitude of perpetual cold. Only under that gleaming roof was there warmth. Many of the men, women, and children who had lost in the now century-old fight for survival had merely been tossed out of their hives. A painless, swift death, but each death in a world so highly specialized that each grown person fitted into his niche naturally and easily, was a distinct loss. Not much, perhaps, but enough for the loss to be felt. Sarka, closing his eyes for a moment as though to shut out a horror which in his mind he could visualize, turned back to the revolving barrel in which he kept in constant touch with all parts of the world at will. It must be done. I must take action. It means the loss of thousands, perhaps millions of lives, in such a war as the mind of man has not hitherto conceived, but for a cause greater than any which has ever hitherto been an excuse for armed conflict. But I must discuss it with the spokesman of the gens. On the table before Sarka was a row of varicolored lights whose source was beneath the floor of the laboratory, out of the heart of the master mountain, part of the intricate machinery of this laboratory, which had been almost 20 centuries in the perfecting. In the dwelling place of each of the spokesmen was a single light, colored like one of the lights on Sarka's table. To speak with any one of the spokesmen, Sarka had but to dim the properly colored light by covering it with the palm of his hand. The light in the home of the thus signaled spokesman was dimmed, and the spokesman would know that Sarka desired to converse with him. Sarka noted the blue light and shuddered, for if he covered it with his palm it would summon Dali, a great scientist, but an erratic one, as Sarka I had so clearly shown. Sarka again turned to the barrel. The area of which Dali was spokesman was, roughly speaking, that part of what had once been the Pacific Ocean, north of a line drawn east and west through the northernmost. I can read. North of a line drawn east and west through the southernmost of the Hawaiian Islands, northward to the pole. The home of Dali was in the heart of what had once been an island historians had called Oahu, now a mountain peak, still retaining a hint of the pre-discovery name, Ohi. The total number of the spokesmen, the oldest of the Earth's inhabitants, was 12, and the remainder of the Earth, not under the tutelary rule of Dali, was divided up among the other 11 spokesmen. Cleric, for example, father of Yaska, was spokesman of that area which men had once called Asia, the vast valleys of the once Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, while the youngest of the spokesmen, in a manner serving his apprenticeship, was tutelary head of a vast plateau once called Africa. The name of this man was Gerd. He, at least, thought Sarka, thinking of each spokesman in turn and cataloguing each in his mind, will be with me. I wonder about the others, and especially Dali. He's always hated us. Then, with the air of a man who's made up his mind and crosses his particular Rubicon in a single step, Sarka rose to his feet and passed along the row of varicolored lights, covering each one with his hand in rapid succession. Then he sat down again, almost holding his breath, and waited. As he stared at the row of lights, his eyes lingered longest on two which were almost golden in color, and his face was very gentle, almost reverent. For those two lights were signals to Sarka I and Sarka II, his grandfather and his father. It was Dali, the irascible, the fiery-tempered, the erratic, who first made answer.
Yes? What is it now?
Sarka smiled a trifle grimly as he spoke a single word. Wait. The voice of Dali, which Sarka had good cause to remember, had sounded as loudly in the laboratory as though Dali had been present there in person, for men had learned to communicate by voice almost without the aid of radio and its appurtenances through the principle upon which the first crude beginnings of radio were fashioned still applied. Each man's dwelling place was both a sender and a receiver, and men could talk and be talked to no matter where they lived. Individuals telepathically summoned a desire of anyone wishing verbal contact. Gerd is here, came the voice of that spokesman. To him Sarka also spoke one word. Wait. I am here, Sarka, came a musical voice, and Yaska is with me, listening. That would be Cleric, loyal friend, master scientist, but always shy of conflict with people, though swift to anger and self-forgetfulness when he knew himself right and was opposed. Sarka darted a look back at the revolving barrel, adjusted swiftly the barrel microscope, and smiled into the faces of Yaska and Cleric, who looked enough alike they might have been brother and sister, though Cleric had been born 10 centuries before his daughter Yaska. They smiled back at him. He shifted the barrel microscope and stared for a second at Dali, there in the barrel, and marked the antagonism Dali was in no pains to hide. One by one, the spokesman reported. Closser from the Americas, Durst from the valleys of the vanished Atlantic, Bolaire from that part of the Arctic Circle not included in the wedge with the gens of Dali thrust northward of the pole, Vardi, Prul, Utah, Al, Vance, and Hime. Each from his appointed area came from the official headquarters of his gens, the name given to those people who acknowledge the tutelage of a spokesman. Each spokesman, therefore, was the mouthpiece of millions of men, women, and children, and over the spokesman, and not themselves spokesmen, were 3 scientists, the Sarkas, first, second, and third. When all 12 of the spokesmen had reported, and been bidden by Sarka to wait, a smile touched the face of Sarka for an instant, as other 2 voices, so nearly alike they might have been the voice of a single person, reported themselves. I am here, son. What is it? Oddly enough, Sarka's father and grandfather reported the exact same words. Sarka smiled at a whimsical thought of his own. It had been some time since the 3 scientist Sarkas had been together, and despite the vast differences in their ages, they might have been triplets. The reports were in, and the spokesman was still waiting, but for almost a minute Sarka waited still. Then he spoke swiftly those words for which there could be no recall. Gentlemen, the time has come when we must go to war. For a long moment after he'd spoken, there was no answer. And then it came, in the jeering laughter of the antagonistic Dali. War? Against whom? The Sarkas are always dreaming. And Dali shall be one of the leaders of Earthlings in this war which I am about to propose. You doubtless recall the proposal you once made to Sarka the First, your proposal to halt for a few moments the headlong whirl of the earth about its axis, to flood. Stop immediately! And Sarka did stop. He'd forgotten, in the excitement of his urge to explain his plans, that the millions of people who gave official allegiance to Dali had never been informed of the hideous proposal he'd made, back there centuries ago, as a corrective for a world rapidly approaching overpopulation. Had his people known, never again would the voice of Dali be heard in life. The spokesman knew, and Sarkas, but no others. Sarka understood the protest of Dali, and so honored it. Dali, after I have explained what it is I wish to do, you'll come to me here, prepared to explain to me exactly how you planned on doing what you proposed to my grandfather. For your knowledge will be necessary to me. Isn't it enough that your grandfather stole from me and amplified an idea that would have made me forever famous without his grandson also stealing the fruit of my brains? Your brains belong to your people. What I plan is for their betterment. But it means war which may last a century, 2 centuries, in which the lives of countless thousands may be lost. Sarka's last words were almost drowned out by the humming sound that came out of the revolving barrel, that perfected device which was the ultimate in the evolution of television and vibration transference. Sarka's heart sank, for he knew the meaning of that sound, and so too did the spokesman. You see? You hear? Look into your barrel, see the clenched fist of the earth's myriads being shaken at you. Listen to the protests of millions who hear your every word. See what your earthlings think of the prospect of war. For a moment, Sarka spoke directly to the people. Be silent and listen. It will be war, yes, but not such a skulking, hideous war as you wage amongst yourselves for a place to live. You fathers are guilty of slaying your sons, you sons of slaying your fathers, merely by thrusting them forth from the hives into the outer cold. This war, I propose, shall be a war that shall match your manhood, if indeed ye be men. Listen to me, and I will find for you new lands to conquer, new homes for your holding, if ye take them.
But where are these new lands of which you speak? Inside the earth? Inside already our hives reach into the earth at a distance of 8 miles. What else then?
For shame, Dolly, you a scientist. Every bit of habitable land on this globe is some man's dwelling place. Spokesman of the gens of earth, look out your windows, look out and upward, and read Dolly's answers in the stars. For a full minute, there was silence throughout the earth, and Sarka saw that the spokesmen were doing his bidding. He looked himself out through the swirling storm which tore at the crest of the Himalayas, a dark and forbidding outside, in the starred dome of which rode the pale-orbed moon. "15 years ago, my father's father," cried Sarka, "Dali told you that he possessed the power to halt for a moment the headlong whirl of the world on its axis about the sun. He could do it then, and no man, whatever he may think of Dali as a man, has ever known him to lie. If 15 centuries ago he could bring the whirling world to pause, why can we not now?" And even though he had thought of this for years upon end, had spoken over and over to himself the words he was now using, rehearsing his proposed argument to the spokesman of the gens, Sarka found himself a moment almost afraid to continue and speak them. "I understand, Sarka," came the excited voice of Gerd, youngest of the spokesmen, "and I follow wherever you think it best to lead. You mean... "Exactly. If the earth can be stayed on its axis, it can be diverted from its orbit entirely. I know, for I have found the manner of its doing, though I need the genius of Dali to check my work and my calculations. We have no new land on this earth to conquer, but the universe is filled with countless other worlds. What say ye, spokesmen of the gens? What say ye, gens of earth?" But for the time of 1,000 heartbeats, neither the spokesman nor the gens made answer to Sarka, and all the world fell utterly silent, absorbing this unbelievable thing of which Sarka had hinted. Over the metallized roof of the world, the snows and storms, the winds and wraiths of the long dead moaned and screamed as with an icy voice of abysmal warning. And for the time of those 1,000 heartbeats, the world was pausing to listen. When realization came, the answer would come from the spokesman and from the gens. And here in the Sarka laboratory, his Rubicon crossed at last, sat Sarka, staring through the barrel microscope into the depths of the revolving barrel. His face was dead white, his eyes narrowed. The first voice which came startled him. "It's mad, Sarka, mad, mad, but I'm with you always." It was the voice of Yaska. No, that's Yaska. I was doing her dad's voice. "It's mad, Sarka, mad, mad, but I'm with you always." It was the voice of Yaska, daughter of Cleric. Chapter 4. The Earthlings Make Ready. "I too am with you." "Spoken like a child. For you are as much a child as this third of the dreaming Sarkas. The scheme's madder even than Yaska intimates. The scheme I once proposed, in which I was cheated by the grandfather of this madman, was times and times more feasible and practical." "Suppose," came the soft voice of Sarka the First, interrupting Dali, "that you put the matter up to your gens, O wise and noble Dali, and see which scheme they would endorse if given the choice in the matter, were your scheme still possible." This quickly silenced the vituperation of Dali, but in no wise prevented his continuance as a loud antagonist of the plan.
How can you return the Earth to its orbit, even granting you're able to take this initial step? How do you keep life on the Earth during its flight during this rainbow-chasing voyage you propose?
All those things have been taken into consideration, O Dali. All of my scheme is practicable, as I think you will agree when I've told you its details. What think you of the plan, Kleiser? And you, Jers, Bowler, Vardy, Proul, Utah, Al, Vance, Hime? When the spokesman had answered, some of them hesitantly, for all the people all this time had remained silent, and none of the spokesmen could be sure how his own gens would feel in the matter, it developed that 7 of the spokesmen were for the scheme, if that it should prove to be possible.
If this is the voice of the majority of the gens, given thus by their spokesman, then I vote with the majority. I shall call upon you immediately, Sarka, for a conference.
I'm glad that the majority of the spokesmen are with me. Especially I am glad that Dali and Cleric vote with me. For the others I have only this to say. I have thought this matter over for almost a century, and I know that the time has come when we must act to save ourselves from self-destruction. Had you not decided with me, I should have acted alone.
Yes? How?
I have, here in my laboratory, the power whereby to accomplish the scheme of which I have told you. Had all the gens defied me, I would have nevertheless sent the Earth outward on this voyage, bringing it within reach of the denizens, first of the Moon, second of Mars, and you people of little courage would have been compelled to fight to save yourselves.
You would have forced us into war?
Came the quavering voice of Prohl, the first spokesman aside from Dali to take active part in the discussion.
Then why, if you had the means in the beginning to enforce your will upon us, confer with us at all?
Sarka was thrilled with satisfaction, for this question gave him the excuse he sought. He had been wondering and scheming how to compel the spokesman of the gens to obey his will. I wanted your opinions, but I also wish you to know that I have the power to go on whether you wish it or not, and you must obey me. How would the 12 gens take this ultimatum of Sarka? For breathless moments after he'd spoken, he waited, and the spokesman with him. Then came the voice of Cleric addressing his people, yet leaving the contacts open so that Sarka and the other spokesmen might hear. What say you, O gens of Cleric? He cried, his voice an exulting, clarioning paean of rejoicing. Do we follow this man who promises us life again? Do we follow this man who promises us that once again we shall dwell in plenty, without the blood of relatives and neighbors on our hands? Answer this man, O gents, for I say unto you, wheresoever he leads, I will follow him. Silence for a heartbeat, and then a murmuring like the sound of waves of long-vanished seas sounded in the laboratory, wherein all things were seen, all sounds were heard. A monstrous voice, loud and savage from the gens of Cleric. Finally the words became intelligible. We follow Cleric wherever he leads. It matters not to us whom Cleric follows, so long as we may follow Cleric. Well spoken, O gens of Cleric, snapped Sarka when the murmuring died down to a whisper and then faded out entirely. Deck yourselves in the white garments of Cleric, and blazon upon your backs and breast the red lily of his house. Prepare for war. These are your orders. The details I leave to Cleric. Then came the voice Dali.
Give me your orders to my gens director, Sarka, for I leave this very moment to come to you.
Thank you, said Sarka, a great wave of exultation sweeping over him. He had expected Dali to be the last and most difficult to manage. Then to the gens of Dali, as the blue light on the table in the laboratory showed, that Dali was already winging toward him. Deck yourselves in the green garments of Dali. Wear as your insignia the yellow star of his house, and prepare for war. Make new and modern ray directors. Refurbish your rotting machines of destruction. Make ready and make haste, for the gens of Dali will be the first of all the gens to move and attack against the dwellers outside. When the time comes, I shall tell you where you dwell. If you win the land, I shall show you. The humming of myriad voices inside the laboratory was now almost continuous, but ever the words of Sarka went out to the spokesman, to the gens, though save in the case of Cleric and of Dali, he did not speak to the gens direct, because he didn't wish in one iota to usurp the authority of the spokesmen themselves. But when less than an hour had passed, he realized that the first step had successfully been taken, and that from now on the success or failure of the scheme rested on his own hands. Perspiration bedewed his forehead, and for a second he prayed. God of our fathers, grant that we be not mistaken, grant that we be right in what we plan, grant that success attend our arms, grant that this scheme of mine lead not to catastrophe, for if this should develop, only I am guilty, and only I should be punished. Amen! As one voice, the spokesman of the gens spoke the word, and Sarka heard it. He'd forgotten for the moment. The spokesman could still hear him. That is all. Prepare your gens, each of you, for such battle as even our histories have never recorded. For we go against foemen whose strength we do not know, whose manner of life we do not know, and we must not fail. Make haste with your preparations, your time is short. And spokesman, counsel your gens that they put aside at once all of their personal differences, all their family quarrels, quarrels with their neighbors, that each adult individual, each unmarried woman, and such married women as have all their children grown who no longer need them, prepare to go forth to battle. From this laboratory, within a brief space, Dali and the Sarkis will give you further word. There's no tea left. Agonies. Then he dimmed the lights and severed contact with the spokesman of the gens. Only 2 lights did he not dim, and to two men he spoke softly. My father and my father's father, come to me at once. There shall be need of the combined genius of the Sarkas if we are to succeed. From both Sarkas, as though they had rehearsed the words against this need of them, came answer. Aye, son, we come. From that moment on, until the Dalis and the Sarkas were ready to take the most momentous step ever taken in the history of the world, the humming within the laboratory did not cease. For the people, the millions and billions of people of the hives were busy, eagerly and feverishly busy, preparing new armament, new engines of destruction, against the time when there should be need of them, and for perhaps the first time in centuries, the people were happy. Raider has redeemed Q&A. What's your question, Raider? If you don't mind me asking, do you have a current job? If so, what is it? So I'm a software developer. I did a lot of website building until very, very recently. Right now I'm working with a hospital to build up their back-end systems. They've been needing some updating to be able to continue to communicate to each other. So I'm a software dev. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Sometimes I get frustrated with what I'm working on and go, well, it was a mistake to teach the rocks to think. But sometimes I get to make the stuff that's behind me. I built that falling snow effect myself. I also, while we're at it, built this myself. This is all HTML. This layout. I obviously I'm using Stream Elements for the chat and alerts, but the layouts themselves I've built myself, all HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Fun stuff. I don't love JavaScript, but I am good at it just because of the positions I've worked on. Really, I've been doing a lot of C# work lately, which really makes me miss doing Java work, honestly. Nearly always the least optimal thing you've ever seen. Don't I know it? Optimizing is for after it works, you know? For not even the passage of 1,000 centuries, or 1,000,000 centuries, could flush from the warm hearts of men the love of conflict. Sarka smiled wanly, his face very pale. He had spoken, his people were busy with preparations, and now there could be no turning back. The world, when he spoke the word, would rush outward to glorious conflict, or perhaps to destruction. A buzzer sounded near the exit dome. Sarka raced to give the enter signal, and Dali, he of the hawk eyes, the sharp nose and sharper tongue, entered the presence of the man who, in a twinkling, had made himself master of the world. Well, I'm here. What do you wish of me? We Sarkas, said Sarka easily, wish to assure ourselves that you will do nothing to obstruct our plans. Dali of the gens of Dali, you are prisoner of the Sarkas until you have passed your word. That I will never do.
passed my word to go forward with you, but I meant, and you knew I meant to go forward as only far as to me seemed right and reasonable.
Chapter 5. The Betrayal of Dali. And until the arrival of the other two Sarkas, Dali said nothing. His face flushed an angry red as Sarkar I received the enter signal and stepped into the laboratory which had once been his, which he had delivered into the capable hands of Sarkar II in order to find new channels for his genius as a worker for the betterment of the people. This he had found in organization, so that the people had worked and labored, despite their personal quarrels, in closer harmony than they ever had before. But now Sarkar III had called, and the two Sarkas responded. Dali snarled at his ancient enemy, who looked to be the image of Sarkar III, and not one whit older, though one had preceded the other into the world by many, many centuries. "This is still the pleasant, congenial Dali, I see," smiled Sarkar I. For the moment it seemed that Dali would die there of his seething anger, but he answered no word for all of a minute. Then,
"This mad grandson of yours has made me a prisoner until such time as I concur in all his plans."
"If he says you are a prisoner, that you are," snapped the elder Sarka angrily. "Son, what is this thing you plan?" "For almost a century," replied Sarka, "I have been planning this. I knew when father told me that Dali had sworn he was able to halt for a moment the headlong flight of the earth in its orbit, that Dali did not lie or bluff. In your day, even, that was possible, and I continued with the knotty problem until I deduced the manner of its doing. I too can halt the earth's rotation, or throw it out of its orbit. I took your idea, Dali, independently of you, knowing you would never reveal your secret to a Sarka, and amplified it until I cannot only halt the earth in its orbit, but throw it out of its orbit entirely." For a moment Sarka studied the angry face of Dali, and his own was very thoughtful. "Dali," he said at last, "I wish you were not our enemy, for you are a genius. The world has need of all the knowledge of such genius it possesses. Why do you oppose us?"
"Because I guessed something of your plan I do not like. I do not like the Sarkas, never have, but neither have the Sarkas had any love for me. When you spoke to us all, I knew that somehow you had discovered the secret. You spoke when you delivered your ultimatum of attacking the moon, and of after it Mars. You also granted to my gens what would have seemed a great honor to anyone who did not fathom the tricky scheming of the Sarkas, that of being in the first into the fray. If we are to be first, and the moon is to be the first attacked, then you plan to relieve the world forever of me, your archenemy, by exiling me and all my gens upon the moon, a dead world covered with ashes, whose people dwell in dank caverns like some gnomes of the underworld."
"Stay your tongue," snapped Sarka. "I granted you a greater honor even than that, Dali. I planned on your gens, led by you, making a successful conquest of the moon, because only such a genius as Dali could force from this dead world a living for his gens. Because you're the wisest of the spokesmen, I planned for you the greatest task. Because I need you, I do not slay you."
"I thank you,"
He bowed low with the deepest sarcasm.
"but you honor me too much. Tell me, pray, is it not true that you planned for the Sarkas their choice of the best and newest worlds in the universe?"
Sarka did not answer for a second, while his sensitive nostrils quivered with fury. The Sarkas had not noticed, but Yaska, daughter of Cleric, had admitted herself through the exit dome in a way known only to Sarka and to herself, as she had entered many times before, as to not disturb Sarka at his labors. She now stood silently there, divesting herself of her belt and outer clothing, beneath which was the golden toga worn by all women of the earth. Dali, however, had seen her, and his eyes narrowed craftily as he awaited this answer of Sarka. "Dali, it is not for you to question me, but to obey me. I have not undertaken this step without mastering all its details, and I refuse to allow you to swerve me in a single one of them from my plan." Dali straightened, standing stiffly at savage attention, and met the angry eyes of Sarka without flinching. There was no fear in Dali, as all the world knew, but he was a schemer and selfish.
"After all, I've known Sarkas to make promises they could not keep. How do I know? How does the world know that you can do what you say you can do?
If I close all contact of this laboratory with the world outside, so that none may hear what I say save we four, and I then whisper here the secret you never told, Dali, when my father's father refused to help you, will you then believe? The face of Dali went suddenly white, but he nodded, his eyes burning redly. Yaska moved closer to the men who stood near the table of varicolored lights. You needed my father's father because the secret of your scheme rested here in the laboratory, which is the highest point in the world. You pretended to need him in your scheme, but you did not need my father's father, though you did need his laboratory, some of the facts of science that he discovered. So you came to him with your scheme, discovered what he believed, though he denied it. Your scheme was possible. He refused to aid you in it. Then, as an excuse to re-enter this laboratory, you told him you would return within 2 days. Now shall I tell you your secret? The lips of Dali were moving soundlessly. His right hand started to rise, as though he would make it signal the negative he was unable for a moment to speak. But even as he stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, Sarka dashed the lights on the table, disconnecting them one by one, to the revolving barrel, which then ceased to revolve for the first time in centuries, whirled when he'd finished, and stepped to the very center of the room. Now your secret, Tully. Still the hand upraised, still Dali tried to speak, and could not. Sarka spoke in a hoarse, almost terrified whisper 4 words. The ovoids. Gasps of surprise from the other 2 Sarkas, whose eyes for a second flashed to the huge barrel, which now was still, silent, and blind. Dawning comprehension was evident in their faces. The success of the revolving barrel, which sees all that transpires in this world, depends on one fact, that its revolving is proportionately timed to infinite exactness with the revolution of Earth about its axis. This barrel is a master barrel of the Earth, which was why Dali needed this barrel and could use no other. Suppose that for a period of 2 days, uniformly progressive, this barrel were forced to revolve in sharp jerks at an increasing rate of speed. With all connections in place and all the world's barrels attuned to the speed of this one, what would happen? What would happen if a single gens were marshaled in warlike array atop the area of the gens and kept up a steady rhythmic march for a period of hours? In a few hours, whispered Sarka the First, the roof of the gens area would begin to vibrate all throughout the area and even into all surrounding gens area. In time, the roof would collapse. Exactly, said Sarka, breathing heavily. This barrel, when attuned to all other barrels in the world, would have this vibratory effect, not only on a certain area of the world, but upon the entire world. Force the speed of the barrels to the uttermost limit, and you sway the world to your will. As a marching horde would sway the roof of a vast section of the world if the horde's commander willed. But that is not enough. The world would tremble, but nothing more. The Earth's store of ovidium, which is anti-gravitational and used in minute quantity in our anti-gravitational ovoids, is evenly distributed throughout the world. By vibrations of the barrels, I can control it, scatter it, or gather it all together wherever I will. By shifting through vibration this anti-gravitational material, I can disrupt, make uneven, or even nullify the pull of gravity on the Earth.
That would do it, said Dali, finding his voice at last. But how would you control the course the Earth would take, thus thrown out of its orbit?
That is, my dear Dali, for the moment my secret.
But is it?
Before the 3 Sarkas could recover from their surprise at the man's sudden vehemence, he made a swift, terrifying move. He leapt away from them to stand beside Yaska, daughter of Cleric.
Sarka, he shrieked, I know you love this woman. Note this little tube I hold against her side. With it I can cause her to vanish for all time merely by a slight pressure of the fingers. And that I will do, unless you immediately open all contacts with the world and remain silent while I tell the people of Earth how you'd betray them.
The 3 Sarkas were petrified with amazement and horror, for they recognized the slender tube in the hand of Dali as a ray director, the world's greatest engine of destruction, and knew that it would do exactly as Dali said it would. Automatically, because they were brave men, they'd stepped a trifle closer to Yaska and Dali. Perspiration poured from their cheeks as they stared at this rebel, but their fears were for Yaska, who now spoke for the first time. "Let him do as he wills," she said smilingly, "since for the good of the world I do not fear to die. Refuse him, Sarka. Know that I go into death's darkness, loving you always, knowing that you will succeed in the end, in spite of opposition of men like Dali." A man of unexpected actions, this Dali, for a while the attentions of the Sarkas were on the little tableau he had staged, his eyes darted to the barrel, to the control which Sarka had touched, still its revolving. Now he sprang away from Yaska, was free of her and the Sarkas, before any could move to intercept him. He dashed to the barrel. Instantly it swept into motion, while Dali whirled to face the Sarkas, and from his lips came a burst of triumphant laughter. One hand was on the barrel control, the other hand still held the ray director. "Fools! Fools! Duped like children, and now it is Dali who's master of the world. Move closer to me, I'll turn my ray director upon the barrel, which you so kindly informed me is master of all the barrels, and of all the vidium deposits. Be glad I did not turn it upon you, but for you I have a kinder, more honorable fate. I am now master, I will direct the destiny of the world, but I'll never leave it. I suspect it is the most pleasant of all the worlds. I will, however, choose for the Sarkas a world that should be the dreariest in all the universe." The Sarkas whirled as soft laughter came from Yaska, daughter of Cleric. Strange, lilting laughter. They turned in time to see her vanish through the exit dome, but for a long moment her jeering laughter seemed to sound in the laboratory she had left, and to judge by her laughter had betrayed, for Dali, arch traitor, had echoed her laughter. I think we've got time for at least one more chapter. Let me see how many chapters are left in here. Oh, there's plenty of chapters left in this one. Yeah, we've got time for at least this chapter. Chapter 6. The barrels in tune. "Remember," said Dali as the barrels began to revolve and its humming mounted moment by moment to normal, "that you must concur in whatever I say to the people of Earth, for if you do not, I swear I'll destroy the Master Barrel. Then what happens to your scheme, Sarka the Third? You see there's no change in the plan save one. I'm the master, not you." Dali was not a madman, for the world conceded him place in its list of geniuses next below the three Sarkas, which was high honor indeed. But Dali possessed in abundance that most universal of all human emotions, jealousy. For centuries he'd been nursing it, watching the Sarkas always attain in the niches just above him, yet never being able to attain to their eminence. Now, however, he'd outwitted them. It might be for a moment only, but while his mastery lasted, he would drink deeply of personal satisfaction. Now, however, there was no gloating in his face, for as he realized that Sarka had realized the infinite gravity of the whole situation. If a mistake were made, the world would plunge to destruction, or go cooling forever in a headlong race through space. "I keep the ray director hidden," he whispered, while the murmuring of the master barrel mounted as it gained speed again. "But know you, Sarkis, that its muzzle always points at the barrel master. Always." Now the forms of Earth were appearing on the barrel. Men in countless hordes were maneuvering in myriads, legions and armies across the face of the globe. There was no marching, but an effortless, swift as light almost, aerial maneuvering. For each human being possessed the tight-fitting metallized cloth, with a gleaming helmet in whose skull pan was the anti-gravitational ovoid, which was the outside garment of the Earth filling. With the ovoid sitting exactly against the skull, man but had to wheel himself in any direction at any livable height, and the action took place. In the same way, one man, to whom others in an organization gave allegiance by appointment, could will all his underlings into whatever formations he desired. As beautiful and effortless the flight of those birds that had vanished from Earth centuries before. "Remember, Dali, that while the speed of the Earth in its orbit is between 18 and 19 miles per second, once thrown out of its orbit and forced to follow a straight or nearly straight line, the speed may be many times that, or much less." "The simplest facts of science were known to me 1,000 years before you were born.
Shall I tell the spokesman of the gens, and be sure you second what I say?
He paused, and then, raising his voice impressively, he spoke.
Spokesman of the gens, O gens of earth, hark ye to the words of Dali and Sarka. The time has come to try the experiment of which Sarka told you, and which I, Dali, of the gens of Dali, has found good, and hereby certify. See that all your barrels are mathematically tuned to catch every sound, every vibration, every picture from this barrel of Sarka, henceforth to be known as the Master Barrel. No matter what happens, no matter what changes take place in the temperature of your homes, no matter what storms may come, touch not your barrels until instructed from this laboratory. Tune your barrels and then leave them. Hasten faster with your preparations for war. Each spokesman of a gens will at once instruct the members of his gens that all partitions between families shall immediately be removed outward from a common center in each case, until 100 families occupy a single dwelling place. Materials from the destroyed partition shall be carefully hoarded, and the newer and bigger areas shall become maneuvering places for the 100 families which shall occupy a given area. Facing a crisis as we are, no thought can be given to privacy. Neighborly quarrels must be forgotten. This move is necessary because no single dwelling place is large enough to be used as a place of maneuver, and from now on until the command is given, maneuvers must not be held outside. For hark ye, O spokesman, O gens of earth, we're about to start upon our voyage in outer space. Spokesman, call in your maneuvering myriads. You have 5 minutes.
And indeed, in 5 minutes, not a flying man could be seen in the cold, stormy outside. And so Dali spoke again.
Tune your barrels, remove partitions. Take care in reducing partitions. You so estimate your stresses and strains that the roof of the world will not be endangered by weight that's unsupported or improperly supported. Food conservers, redouble your production and rush your transportation of food capsules. Mothers of men, take over the labors of your son and your husbands. Sisters and sweethearts of men, join the myriad of maneuvers, for too you may require the knowledge of fighting.
In spite of himself, an ejaculation of admiration escaped the lips of Sarka. Hearing it, Dali turned to him, and a flush of pleasure tinged his cheeks as Sarka shaped one word with his lips. Excellent. Then, after a pause, Sarka spoke directly to the gens of Earth.
Take heed the words of Dali, for they are also the words of the Sarkas.
Then an expression of surprise flashed across the face of Sarka as Dali's fingers began to move in a swift sort of pantomime, for the side manual he used was the secret manual of Sarka and Jaska. His heart cold within him at this new proof of her betrayal, Sarka nevertheless noted the words which dropped silently off the fingers of this enemy of the Sarkas.
You are wise to resist no further. Together we can do much, and if you give your word not to oppose me, we can work together, but I will be the master.
But if we grant you mastery, will you heed our advice if it is good?
I will, but I will alone be the judge of its worth.
Then we work together henceforth. Let us begin. In the time required to move from here to the moon, our people will have ample opportunity to perfect themselves in maneuvers. Are you ready, O my father and father's father? Ready, they said together. But for a moment Dali hesitated.
Your word,
he snapped, looking at each Sarka in turn, and each in his turn nodded. They'd given their word, but not their love to Dali. Dali bowed low to Sarka the youngest, who darted to the onyx base in which revolved the master barrel, and pressed a small lever of metallized jade set in a slot on the southern side of the base of the onyx. The humming sound within the barrel became perceptibly louder, and as the minutes passed and Sarka stood, arms folded, watching the revolving barrel, it continued to increase. Here was the crisis, and as they watched its sure, certain approach, they forgot their enmities, Dali and the Sarkas, and they watched the whirling barrel. Minute by minute its humming increased. The figures were still plain to be seen within the barrel, but becoming blurred of outline. Partitions had been removed all over the earth, increasing the size of rooms 100-fold, reducing their number 100-fold. The gens of earth, by 100 families, were maneuvering under the heads of hundreds. The depths of the master barrel, therefore, was a maze of flying men, their extremities slightly blurred, and becoming more so as the master barrel increased its speed. Here now was shown the value of organization fostered by Sarka the First, for in all the world there was no single barrel out of tune with the master barrel, and as the master barrel increased the speed of its revolving, so too increased at the same time the speed of all the other barrels. Minute by minute the humming of the master, and with it the others, increased in volume. "Father, to the observatory behind the barrel, please, to watch the stars, and from them to note the direction which we take when the combined vibrations of the barrels have affected the quiescence of Earth's deposits of iridium, and through its shifting disturbed the flight of Earth in its orbit." With a brief nod, Sarka's father hurried around the master barrel to the tiny observatory beyond, from which, through the micro-telescopes, those who knew could read the secrets of the planets, the stars, the universe. Sarka watched him go, wondering if Dali might not forbid him, but Dali merely watched him go and said nothing. Now that the time of change was upon the world, Dali realized his responsibility. It was little wonder that he began to be, for the first time, a little bit afraid. "Note, Dali," snapped Sarka, and Dali started nervously as his name was spoken. "Feel the trembling of the laboratory, just as the same trembling affects all the other buildings in the world in which barrels are located. As the minutes pass, the trembling will go deeper and deeper, and by tomorrow the first tremors will be reaching into the earth to several miles below the last habitable inner level. And then my father will know by his study of the stars in which new direction we're traveling. For within 24 hours, the earth will have started on its voyage of conquest."
Is there no way, Sarka, by which we can control the direction of our flight?
"There is a way, O wise and gallant Dali, but since you do not know it, who now is master?" Dali's face became pale as chalk, and Sarka smiled a little as he watched him. Then, wondering what new resolve stirred the depths of this master egoist of the earth, he watched emotions flash to and fro across the face of Dali, watched the color return to his cheeks. The cold of death gripped at his heart when Dali spoke.
"I do not fear death, O wise and gallant Sarka. I've lived fully and well for many, many centuries. You know that I do not fear to slay people of the earth. For did I not propose to your father's father that a flood would be beneficial to unfit earthlings? Here then, keep your secret. I shall allow the earth to go outward into space, out of control, whatever direction it will. If any other worlds happen to lie in our pathway..."
Dali shrugged indifferently, turning his back on Sarka to again peer into the depths of the master barrel, whose voice had risen to a vaster murmur, whose pictures were becoming moment by moment more blurred as time fled irrevocably into eternity. Sarka the First took advantage of his opportunity and leapt at the back of Dali, his hands extended to fasten them in the throat of his ancient enemy. Dali whirled with a burst of laughter, and the muzzle of his ray director covered the person of the first Sarka. In a flash, the spot where Sarka the First had been was vacant. There was not a single sign to show that he'd ever stood there. Silence then rang, save for the mounting murmur, the master barrel. Yeah, one more. Chapter 7, Outer Space.
"He only proved a belief I've entertained for centuries. All the male Sarkas are fools, and the females, too, for bearing them."
Sarka said nothing, but within his breast a deep hatred was forming for Dali. He'd disliked him before and been amused by him, but in the busy life of Sarka there'd been no time for hatred of anyone. Busy people had no time for hatreds, you see. "You should be torn to pieces for that, Dali. We needed my father's father in our efforts, but the loss to the world of one super genius cannot be balanced by slaying another, so you are safe for now."
"What he can do, I can do."
Sarka turned away from him, seating himself beside the table of varicolored lights, and his heart was as heavy as lead in his chest. He blamed Yaska for much of this, and his heart was burdened, despite her treachery, by the fact that he loved her, always would love her. Love was the one possession which made centuries of life desirable to the men of the earth. For men could spend centuries in seeking a true mate, knowing that there were still other centuries in which to enjoy her. A woman was a man's greatest boon, his excuse for living, as was man excuse for woman. Through the centuries, when humankind remained forever young, the joy in each other of those truly mated grew as their knowledge grew. And now Yaska had failed Sarka, for when half a century they'd loved each other. Why had she done it? He'd given her no reason to do so. Had there been some other reason? Why had she laughed and left them after the betrayal of the Master Beryl into the hands of Dali? Before God, I believe that you, Yaska, were playing a game to dupe Dali as he played a game to dupe us. Down in his heart he wasn't sure, but somehow, just to whisper to himself his faith in Yaska, gave it back to him in some measure, and by so much lightened the weight upon his heart. For now his responsibilities were greater than they'd ever been before, and he had need of all his faculties. She'll come back, or somehow communicate with me and explain everything. But he refused to ponder on how Dali the betrayer had gained possession of the secret sign manual he had believed known only to Yaska and himself. That too might be explained satisfactorily, for Dali was cunning. From the side of the laboratory, opposite the revolving barrel, came a soft tinkling sound like the striking of a musical bell. Sarka rose wearily, strode to the wall, where a narrow aperture opened, in which rested food capsules sufficient for one meal for 3 men. He smiled wryly. They knew then that the food conservers, deep in the earth as they were, that Sarka the First was no more, and indeed sent food for 3 men. All the world knew, perhaps, yet no single person had raised voice in protest, or if any had, the mounting murmur of the barrels had drowned it out.
Sarka, at what time do you estimate that the flight of the Earth in its orbit will be materially affected?
It's being affected this moment, Dali, shifting the Ovidium store. Within 12 hours we will be in readiness to start our journey. Remaining absolutely motionless within the domed laboratory, it was now possible to feel the ever so slight motion, not only of the laboratory, but of the mountain crest upon which it rested. Not so much a to and fro motion as a roundabout motion. Just as the slightest sound flies outward through space endlessly, and the slightest vibration moves outward until the end of time and of space, Sarka knew that the vibration set up by the barrel, slight though it was already being felt at the poles of the earth. Not enough to be noticed there, but existent just the same. In 12 hours, the world will be fighting against this combined vibration and anti-gravitational force we're starting, and second by second accelerating. Sarka explained to Dali, fighting to remain on its pathway about the sun, but we will win against it, and with each new vibration, each succeeding one being more strongly felt, will force the earth that much more against the pull which holds it in orbit. The laboratory was trembling. The mountain beneath it was trembling, both in accordance with the scientific design. There was no element of chance in it, for the mountains moved, and the laboratory on its crest moved, as science willed. It was now difficult for Sarka to remain still where he sat, for the trembling was exciting his heart action and causing the blood to rush to his cheeks, making him feverish. He rose to his feet and began pacing the floor. He strode to the jade lever, moved it ahead a fraction of an inch, and perceptibly the murmuring of the barrel increased, as did the trembling of the laboratory and of the mountain. 12 hours later, Sarka shouted a single word to Dali. Now! The laboratory was swinging about in a sort of circle in a way that made one dizzy if one remained still for the merest second. Sarka, glancing out into the outside, across which blew the storms of the heights, and noting that no cracks appeared in the surface of the world's vast roof, knew that the swaying motion had been transmitted evenly to all the earth, and that so far at least his calculations had been correct. But Dali was in a cold sweat of fear and deathly sick. The motion of the laboratory, like the inside of a whirling top, made him ill, though Sarka could tell that he fought against it with all his great will. Sarka strode to him, looked him in the eyes for a moment. Dali looked back, glaring defiance. "Are you afraid, Dali?" he shouted, to be heard above the screaming of the master barrel.
"I'm not afraid. Has the time arrived?"
Sarka paused as though for dramatic effect, and raised his right hand high, while his left hand dropped the metallized jade lever. There was still room in the slot in the onyx base for the lever to move forward ever so little. "We have reached the exact place where the Earth can, by pressure upon this lever, be continued on in its orbit, or forced out of it, out into space. What shall it be, Dali? If I move the lever forward, we start our voyage and may not be able to return." For a moment, the nostrils of Dali quivered as though with fear. His face was white with his illness, but out of his eyes peered the fanatic self-confidence of the man.
"Push it forward, O Sarka."
Sarka, smiling lightly, pushed the lever to its uttermost limit, still with his right arm upraised. For full 5 minutes he stood thus, and then, "Now!" he shouted, bringing down his arm. "We've begun our journey into space. Come, let us look outside and await the first reports from my father." The two men, forgetting again for the moment the fact of their enmity, strode to the southern wall of the laboratory and looked out across the roof of the world. "You will note, Dali, that in a matter of hours the roaring of the etheric winds will possess everything. We will have passed in the infinite reaches of outer space, or if I make so bold as to say so, it were better if Dali, self-named master of the world, knew whither he was going." Alright, folks, I think that's a fantastic cliffhanger to leave off on, and so I will be leaving off on that cliffhanger. We will come back next week to finish the remaining 3 chapters in this issue, and then we will read From an Amber Block, The Terror of Air Level 6, The Forgotten Planet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and The Power and the Glory, and A Star That Breathes. Perhaps we'll even make it through Murder Madness, depending on how long it is, and we'll definitely be reading The Reader's Corner when we get there too. I really appreciate you all dropping by tonight. I'm so excited to be Twitch affiliate. Really, it's less for, the material, it's less for the material of like, oh yeah, I can get bit donations now. Oh yeah, I can get money from Twitch subs. Like, yeah, money's nice, but I've got a day job. I've got a day job to keep the lights on. What I really appreciate about it is just the fact that it's a crystallized, obvious point at which I can look and say, I have an audience that supports me. I am managing to entertain people. And of course, it's also, another fringe benefit is the other stuff it unlocks for me on Twitch. But I digress a great deal. Tune in next week for the rest of this and several more of the short stories in the issue besides. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't